Oh, my God, that was a bad habit. Monthly automotive get-together. I am Miss Motormouth from AutoByTel.com, and, of course, I am joined by Chelsea Sexton, our awesome new co-host from ChelseaSexton.com. And, you know, I'm Miss Motormouth on Twitter, and she's EV Shells, CHELS, on Twitter, so you guys can tweet at us during all of this. And we are going to do this every first Tuesday of every month at 8 p.m., until everyone is tired of talking, and that's 8 p.m. Eastern. The dial-in code this week is 712-432-0900, and the actual code, I said code, it's the number, is 911633-pound. And we are going to switch in a second here to our podcast format, which means you guys are going to be put on mute. And if you want to ask a question with our special guest, then you're going to have to dial *6 during the call, which means Ben will see that you're trying to ask a question, and he will put you through when we are at a point where you can ask us a question. How's that sound?
So open line becomes restricted line.
It becomes a little bit restricted just for the guest portion because it's going to be a podcast, right? And then at the end of that, we'll go back to the normal mayhem, you know, that you guys know and love. So, Ben, whenever you are ready, I think we can, I think Eric's already on the phone, aren't you, Eric?
This conference is being recorded.
I sure am. I've been looking.
Q&A session started.
Listening to your talks about Accords. I was waiting for you to start talking about full-size trucks that run on biogas.
That's what you're here for.
Well, everybody, welcome Eric Fitch from PurposeEnergy. And, gosh, I'm Michelle and, of course, Chelsea.
It's Chelsea.
Well, thanks for having me, Miss Motormouth.
Hello. So this is kind of a funny story, Eric. So you were brought to my attention because when I was in Detroit the last time, they were filling me full of Magic Hat number 9 at the Volt Lounge in the Renaissance Center.
Nice.
And I was going on about Magic Hat Brewery on Twitter, and then MPGO-matic, Dan Gray, who was on the line earlier, he's still listening, was asking about biogas from breweries. And I think it was Evans Premium and Magic Hat that both pointed out to me what you were doing. So you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, you bet. PurposeEnergy, we're a biofuels company, and our specialty is converting brewery waste into renewable natural gas. When you brew beer, you make a lot of different waste products. There's a lot of rinse water because it's a batch process. You have to rinse out all the tanks. And there's yeast. You actually end up making sugar water first, and you feed the sugar water to yeast. The yeast turn that sugar water into beer, plus a lot more yeast. And you got to figure out how to get rid of that yeast. It's hard to get rid of. And the other thing that you have a lot of, as far as byproducts go, is spent grain. You start off with barley. Kind of wash all of the sugar out of it, but you're left with a lot of cellulose, hemicellulose, and proteins. And for a brewer who wants to make and sell beer, all these byproducts become a nuisance, and they actually become expensive to get rid of. We're offering a different solution for them. If you take all of those things and you put them in our patented bioreactor, we can convert them into renewable natural gas. So not only are we cleaning up those byproducts and making them safe to discharge and inexpensive to discharge, also making a fuel out of it, so we kind of get two values for one. The Magic Hat's interesting because Magic Hat, it's about the 40th largest brewery in the United States, located in South Burlington, Vermont, and they are our first customer. We just built our first biogas plant here. I'm actually in South Burlington right now, and we got our first plant, the first of its type in the world that takes all three byproducts from the brewing industry.
That's pretty crazy. They were your first customer?
Yeah, they're our first customer. We had this crazy idea. We did a pilot down in Florida with a Yuengling brewery. Yuengling's got a brewery in Tampa. That was in the end of 2007. It was a pretty successful pilot. And after we had the results, we were looking for somebody who'd be our guinea pig, so to speak. And we came and talked to the guys at Magic Hat. They're a pretty progressive brewery. They're actually the largest brewery other than a large bud plant in New Hampshire, but other than the bud plant, they're the largest brewery within driving distance of my house. So it seemed like a pretty good fit for us. We talked to them. We told them what we'd done at the pilot and what we thought we could do with their brewery. they said, sure, you can do that, and you can do it here.
What constitutes a big brewery, by the way? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure a Bud plant's pretty big, and a lot of people drink that Bud Light.
Oh, yeah. Well, Budweiser actually is 50% of the U.S. market. They make about 100 million barrels a year, and they do that in 12 different breweries. Their average size is something like 8 million barrels per year.
And a barrel, is it the same as an oil barrel?
No, I think an oil barrel is, 48 gallons, is that right? A beer barrel is 31 gallons. And the metric that most people know is a keg. A 15.5-gallon keg is actually a half barrel. A long time ago, when you used to have coopersmiths making wooden barrels, they're actually 33-gallon barrels for beer. But today, you get your half barrels of 15.5-gallon, and you can get a quarter barrel, of course, which is a quarter of that, 31 gallons. But a big brewery, as far as we're concerned, is something that makes more than 100,000 barrels of beer per year, and there are about 100 of those in the United States. And a big brewery is important because our facility, I mean, it's a power plant. It's big, it's expensive. And if you build one that's twice as big, it doesn't cost twice as much. So the bigger you make it, the better the economic return is. And conversely, if you make it smaller, you might not be able to make enough value between the gas and the byproduct remediation to actually pay for the equipment. So you need to be at least 100,000 barrels a year for a system like this to make sense.
And how much is equipment for them to convert?
Well, it depends on the size, obviously. Something like Magic Hat, it's between $2 and $3 million to put in the facility, and they brew about 180,000 barrels a year right now. If you were to go to a much bigger facility, you could be talking between $6 and $10 million for a plant, depending on how big the brewery was.
Wow.
But you can make a lot of gas. It's I think most people don't know this, but the largest biogas producer in the world is Anheuser-Busch. And they make all that biogas just by treating their wastewater. As far as we're concerned, the wastewater is kind of like candy for our digester. It doesn't make a lot of gas. The other things, the spent grain and the spent yeast, that's where all the gas potential comes from. So we can make 10 times as much gas as what Budweiser makes. So we could help them not only be the largest biogas producer in the world, but 10 times the largest biogas producer in the world.
Wow, Chelsea, this kind of brings me back to the whole VC world that's involved with the alternative fuels, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we were talking earlier about how enamored the venture capital world is with all things biogas, biofuel, algae, all of those things.
Well, tell me about it. Add beer to that, and people get really excited. All we need is a little bit of social marketing, and we'd have a home run.
Well, I think beer is actually the ideal device for social marketing, certainly more attractive than algae.
Yeah, definitely. But the gas...
Yeah, beer is more fun than algae, isn't it? Nobody likes to clean their fish tank.
Yeah, hey, listen, we get to work at a brewery all day long. I mean, how bad can that be?
How does this help the breweries, in terms of their sort of their point system of their manufacturing output? Does it affect? It probably benefits them, right?
Do you mean as far as the greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah.
Well, we consider ourselves to be carbon neutral. If you think about it, everything that we're putting into our digester, it was made by a plant in photosynthesis at one point. So the carbon, every atom of carbon that's in our feedstock first came from atmospheric carbon dioxide. So we take it from the atmosphere, grow it in barley, pull some of the sugars out to make beer with, and then what's left we put in our digester, and we make methane gas, which is the same thing, the same constituent gas that's in natural gas. And when that eventually gets fired, wherever it gets fired, it's going to revert back to atmospheric carbon dioxide. So it's just a short circuit there. We consider that to be carbon neutral. That's different from, say, pulling petroleum out of the ground or pulling coal out of the ground and burning it, because you'll be taking subterranean carbon and then introducing it to the atmosphere, so you're actually affecting the greenhouse gas concentration.
wait, so it actually is a byproduct methane gas, or you're actually using the methane gas?
Well, we produce methane. We manufacture methane gas. We take the waste byproduct and we use it to manufacture methane gas. And then the methane gas, since it's the same as natural gas, you can use it in all the same ways you'd use natural gas. For instance, we can pipe it right into the brewery's boiler, and they can use it to make more beer. We've got a really big Guascor genset. It's something that you find, say, in a tractor or a combine. It's a Spanish-manufactured big inline 8 spark ignition engine, and we run the biogas to this engine, and it turns a generator, and it can put out 330 kilowatts of power.
Wait, you repurposed a tractor engine?
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, we didn't do it. There's a company in Missouri that does this. They bought an old New Holland manufacturing plant, and they buy these big engines, and they make their own generators and connect them together, and they actually put these on a lot of farms where people have farm digesters that do something similar. We found them, and we had them custom build a kit for us. We put it inside of a big ISO container. There's a big genset in there, the genset being the engine and the generator. And we've got a heat recovery skid. We take the heat off the exhaust. We've got a recirc loop on the coolant, and we've got a recirc loop on the oil. And we can recover 1.6 million BTUs an hour in heat from the genset while it's operating. We can either use that heat to control the temperature of our digester, or we can use it to preheat the groundwater that's going into the brewery. I tell you what, that genset, it sure purrs like a kitty on the biogas.
That's pretty amazing. I think we have a question from Dan Gray from mpgomatic.com. Ben, you want to let him in?
So Eric, the biphase orbicular biodigester, that if the main purpose is to produce the biomethane, but the byproducts are what types of liquid fuels?
Well, we don't make liquid fuels. We make three things. One thing we make is treated water. The wastewater that comes into our plant, it's not something you could discharge, to the ground. You couldn't discharge it to a waterway, and you really couldn't even discharge it to a wastewater treatment plant because it would be too expensive. But we reduce a property called the oxygen demand and clean the water. So we're producing treated water. We're also producing a solid component. The solid component, it's got a lot of different uses. It can be used as a bedding for livestock. It can be used as an organic fertilizer. You can land apply that for a soil nutrient program. And you could also use it as a feedstock for a biomass plant. And for reference, if you said you were going to do a project at one of these 8 million barrel a year breweries, you'd make about 10% of the feedstock for a 60 megawatt biomass power plant. And the third thing we make is the biogas. And the biogas, it's not liquid unless you were going to cryogenically cool it and compress it. And you could essentially make liquefied natural gas or LNG with our product. You can make CNG. There's a lot of CNG actually in this region. People use it for bus transport. We thought about whether or not that would be an appropriate thing for trucking distribution if there was a fleet that's biogas or CNG. But those are the three things.
Someone's getting attacked. Yeah, we were actually discussing that earlier about the sort of the Northwest CNG sort of movement. What were you going to say, Chelsea?
Oh, I was going to actually ask what he estimates the payback period is on some of the, if it costs a couple $1 million to put it into a plant, the greenhouse gas benefits and environmental stuff aside, what do you estimate is the payback period for these companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. People, they're not really motivated necessarily by doing things environmentally, but they are motivated by the economics. If you look at a project, a medium-sized project, and this also depends on what the waste treatment charges are for a given location, because we produce value in waste treatment and in the fuel value. But the simple payback being how much cost can we avoid for the plant and how much did the plant cost, it can be 2 years or less. Once you start taking operating costs out of it, and things of that nature. What we're targeting is something like a 25% IRR for our customer partners, and that would generate a pretty good business for Purpose Energy.
Yeah, I think Ben and Jerry should stick it in their trucks.
You know, Ben & Jerry's actually has a digester. They have one that treats some of their low-strength wastewater, the clean-in-place stuff.
I'm not
right.
surprised.
Didn't I see on one of your film clips that you guys have a
Q&A queue is cleared.
Sorry, you have a yogurt company that's interested?
Yeah. You know, there's an interesting movement. People are starting to switch to Greek yogurt. The only difference between regular yogurt and Greek yogurt is this stuff called acid whey. You ever eat from a tub of yogurt and then you put it back in the fridge and you pull it out and it has that clear liquid on top?
Right.
That clear liquid, that's the acid whey. If you were to take the regular yogurt and spin it in a centrifuge, you'd separate the stuff that looks like opaque solids from this clear liquid, and then you'd end up with Greek yogurt and, of course, acid whey. And there's a plant that's recently been installed in Vermont, and I think they're the fourth largest Greek yogurt manufacturer in the United States. And they've got a lot of acid whey they need to deal with. Right now they're just trucking it off-site, and we're working on a proposal to help them treat that acid whey. And
what happens when they truck it off-site? Where's it go?
It goes in a manure pit. It goes in a manure pit for the farmers. So you think about a farmer that has maybe 100 or 150 head of cattle, which is kind of what the Vermont demographic is like. They're pretty small herds, and they're looking for places where they can sell their milk. If a yogurt plant comes in and locates right near their farm, well, now all of a sudden they have a place where they can sell all the milk that they make and more. But in order to do that, somebody has to remove the acid whey from the yogurt plant. So they pull in with their milk trucks, unload their milk, and then they pull over to where the waste tank is. They take the acid whey and they truck the acid whey back to the farm and they put it in their manure pit. It's problematic for the farmers because there's a limit to how much they can land apply and during what seasons they can, and they have to obviously worry about all of the manure that their cattle produce. But essentially, if we take this acid whey, then we can sell our milk, and if we don't, then we can't. So the motivation is certainly there. Well, wouldn't it be better if you took that acid whey and made a significant amount of biofuel with it, though?
Is it enough that you could actually power a significant amount of vehicles?
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the metric that I think about for our Magic Hat installation. Your average house is going to use less than 10 kilowatts of power, and our genset can do 330 kilowatts. So you're looking at a significant number of homes. Actually, let me take that back. Your average house can do like 1 kilowatt, and we can do 330 kilowatts. So, hundreds of homes we can power with this brewery waste.
Chelsea, you may be able to help me with this in California, but someone told me recently when I was up at staying with them in Mill Valley in Northern California that they had both their house in Mill Valley and their Stinson Beach home covered with solar cells, and there was this whole thing of being off the grid. But then they realized after they did it that the power companies are not actually able to take the power past the next person on the pole from you. If you are sending them 300 kilowatts and they're only using 10, they'll use the 10 and the 200 just goes away.
Yeah,
does that sound
right?
Right?
It's a little different here. At Magic Hat, we actually, Purpose Energy owns the plant, the biogas plant. And we can't sell power to Magic Hat. If we did, power is regulated. We'd have to become a publicly regulated utility. The overhead associated with that, just too much. Yeah, I mean, even just the words sound bad. So what we end up doing instead is we have a deal with the local power company, and we've put in the infrastructure to be able to tie into the grid. And we're kind of an independent power producer, and we sell electricity right to Green Mountain Power.
Yeah, I mean, the issues, as I understand them here, are not the utility's capacity to take the energy. There are certainly office issues. So you can't, especially with it lacking policy to support it, you don't get credit beyond what you use. So if you only use 10 and you give them 20, you only get credit for 10. And once you get down to 0, you get nothing beyond that here. But I've not heard anything about not being able to actually take the electricity. How it gets redistributed may vary depending on the utility itself. And then here, at least, and this will spread elsewhere, and it's starting with cars, and I think it'll evolve, especially around solar. In fact, there's legislation right now to not have anybody who provides electricity for the purpose of fuel be considered a regulated utility. So it exempts everybody that's trying to do electricity for public charging or for multifamily dwellings or Google offering it at their workplace or whoever. I mean, they're really, really broad in how it's being defined. So right now it's within the scope of vehicles themselves. If you're using electricity as a fuel, you're not a utility. You can sell it, you can give it away, you can do whatever you want. You're completely unregulated, assuming this bill passes, and it looks like it will. Whether that's a good idea is a whole separate conversation. But that will also, once California sets that bar, I think it'll migrate east, and then it will end up translating into some of these other uses besides vehicles.
Yeah, I wonder if we could make a big car charging bank in our parking lot. People from all around come and park and charge their cars, and we'd be able to charge a higher tariff for it.
You could. You certainly could provide the service. Whether or not it's a monetized service remains to be seen. For 15 years in California, the public chargers have all been free, and it's because the site owners preferred it that way, not because they couldn't charge money, but they considered it a marketing expense, and they'd rather have the lead points and brownie points and whatnot. We don't yet have enough vehicles to support monetization, but there are companies that are trying.
The vehicle for selling the power that you were talking about, that sounds to me like something that they call a net metering program. And in net metering, you can make the wheel spin backwards until 0. So you
but you need
for everything you've made. But we did something a little bit different than that. We did a power purchase agreement. So we've got an agreement with the local utility as if we're a 60 megawatt power plant, but we're not. We're a third of a megawatt.
Yeah, on an individual scale, it requires generally feed-in tariffs or some sort of policy like that. The issue is not making the meter spin backwards; it's what happens once it gets to 0. So in the absence of being somebody large that could do a PPA, it's how they're sort of different scale conversations, but similar.
Yeah, of course, that's so regional; it's very state dependent.
Right, and there are over 3,000 utilities in the country.
Wow, that's a lot.
A little bit.
You know what's interesting? When we started this, we knew we were going to make a lot of biogas, and we had to think about what we wanted to do with it. We know it's got value, but what's the best value for it? The thing that I think that makes the most sense for us is to be able to replace boiler fuel. Boiler fuel is largely unregulated, and if we give that to the brewery or whoever our customer is, maybe it's a yogurt plant or a distillery, then the value of it, it's the retail value of that fuel. So that's always a good option. But the limit there with a boiler system, they have a demand for steam and then they don't have a demand for steam. They don't really run continuously all the time. At least the flame front isn't always a continuous level. And we're going to have times where we're making biogas because we make it continuously, and there's just no use for it at the boiler. And we thought, well, we could flare it and get no value for it. That didn't seem like a good idea. We could scrub it, and we could actually deliver it right back into the gas pipeline. That seemed like a pretty good idea. We thought we could compress it and have a CNG fueling station or even store it and try to load balance with the boiler at the brewery. That seemed like a good idea. But people are really motivated to do renewable electricity projects, so much so that there's a lot of financing that's available for renewable electricity projects. And that's really the thing that put us over the edge. If we were grid connected, then that made us eligible for a significant amount of project finance for the plant that we built. And that's what ultimately made the decision for us to buy this genset and produce power.
That's interesting. Given the different renewable portfolio standards, I'm not entirely surprised.
Yeah, there's nobody really motivated to do a renewable biogas project. There's no financing incentive. There's no tax incentive. And the biofuel, it's got a considerable amount of value, but if it's not a liquid fuel, the caller, I think his name was Dan, that asked the question before, asked what liquid biofuel we were producing or not. If we were making a liquid biofuel like ethanol that you could put into a vehicle, well, now all of a sudden the federal government's got a lot of subsidy available. But where you're making renewable natural gas, not so much so.
So we were talking about that a little bit earlier, the current enthusiasm politically for natural gas, certainly regionally, but also on the Hill. Are you guys at all sort of working with the traditional natural gas folks at all to get lumped in with whatever incentives they are able to procure, like in Utah and the various places it is very popular?
We're not really politically active. For the most part, our projects make sense economically on their own. We don't really need the subsidy. It's nice. We don't need it, so we can move forward. One group that we pay attention to is the American Biogas Council. It's a new organization. There are, I would guess, probably 20 different members, and technically we're not a member, but we've been involved since the ABC was formed, and they have some lobbyists in D.C. that are working on trying to come up with some biogas credits, or certainly some tax credits. But we don't really participate as PurposeEnergy. We're still a young company. We don't have a lot of resource for things like lobbyists or a lot of touch in Capitol Hill. We do keep in touch with our local senators. I'm sorry?
When did you guys start?
The company was formed in 2007.
That is young.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those young, fledgling MIT startup companies.
Eric, does the digester have to be located next to a brewery, or can it be done remotely?
It doesn't have to be, but it makes a lot of sense. One of the things about a digester, it likes to operate around body temperature, around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. There's bacteria that actually are the worker bees. And bacteria, they like to be around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Interestingly, if you look at all of the stuff that comes out of the brewery, some of it comes out cold, some of it comes out hot. If you average it, it comes out of the brewery right around 100 degrees. If you're local, if you're right adjacent, then when everything hits your digester, it's the right temperature, and you don't have to use a significant amount of energy to heat the digester all the time. If you were to truck it off-site, then you'd lose some thermal heat during that transportation, and then you'd have to scavenge some of your gas that you produce in order to heat it back up. The other thing that's really key is trucking anything is expensive. And if you're located on site, you can pump it. Pumping is cheap by relative standards. So putting it right on the brewery site is pump things underground. We dug some trenches and put some pipes underground, and we pump it right from the brewery into our digester.
But so the problem I would see with a lot of these microbreweries is that the microbreweries in the middle of a town. Like I'm here in outside of Princeton, and there's the Triumph Brew Pub, and they're right in the middle of town, and there's no room to put a digester next to the building because there's another building on one side, another building on the other side, and a parking lot that they're not going to tear up behind it because it's too valuable. So it seems like there may be a case to build a centralized one in states where there are a number of microbreweries. I know, there's one here in Princeton. There's another one in Lambertville down by the Delaware River, about half an hour away. And maybe there's a way to keep things warm in the truck as you're moving it. But here's my bigger question: when these liquid wastes come from the brewery, is there still sugar and alcohol in that water?
There is.
And I'm sure you've thought about maybe pre-processing it or distilling it to pull the alcohol out beforehand, or would that work against the production of methane?
There's actually a company that does that. I can't think of their name off the top of my head, but
yeah,
I know Sierra Nevada has a system.
Yeah.
It's a filtration system.
Yeah.
That can selectively pass ethanol through the membrane, but not water. And they're able to extract ethanol that they can use to fuel their fleets.
Yeah, apparently they're using the e-fuel, some version of the e-fuel microfueler system, and those folks still have a picture of Arnold on the front page. Maybe it's time to take that down. But there's alcohol in them there hills. There's multiple fuels past what you're doing now. So if you look at, hey, maybe Bob is the new super refinery with a service station right in front of it where people could get their CNG refill, their electric refill, or their E85 refill. So it's the local production of transportation fuel. I've been looking at the ethanol end of it for months now, and when your company came up, I read up and thought, wow, that sounds a lot like what the farmers are doing with all the cow manure, and that they're producing. Don't mind my dog. That they're producing their own electricity.
I'll let your dog attack you for a second, Dan. You guys, if you have just joined us, we are Chelsea Sexton and Michelle Naranjo from Open Line, and we are live with Eric Fitch from PurposeEnergy. If you want to call in, please go to bit.ly/openline, and the number is there with the pin for you to call in, and you can push *6 to ask a question. So so far, it sounds to me like microbreweries in the middle of urban centers should probably have a laundromat next door that they can power the dryers.
Yeah, the microbreweries themselves, we talked about how there's a volume limit. Microbreweries by themselves wouldn't make sense. And you bring up a good point. Not all breweries are going to have real estate available. With this plant that we put in at Magic Hat, it's a few thousand square feet in the backyard, and if there's not a few thousand square feet available for a digester and a pump house, then it's obviously it's not an option. It's a non-starter. But I think you also bring up a good point about the ethanol. There's no reason why you couldn't run these two processes in series and first extract the residual alcohol that comes out in the waste, especially in the spent yeast, before it goes into our digester. We can obviously make methane gas out of that, but the ethanol by itself is more valuable than the per unit of energy, because it's liquid, it's transportable. So if you could first implement the system similar to the one you described at Sierra Nevada, then you could do something like what you suggested, and you can have an ethanol fueling station, a CNG fueling station, and a power-up station all in one location. Maybe it's a good opportunity for collaboration.
Get Ben Kosla on the line.
Well, Eric, I'm going to ask you this. This is going to be completely probably off base, but you've been in a few startups, right?
Oh, yeah. I've been in everything from my favorite one, before, except for this one, my favorite one, we used to take these smart materials that dampen the twin tails on fighter jets. We put them on skis to dampen the vibration on skis.
Oh, wow.
That one was pretty cool. After 9/11, started a company with some guys from MIT. We did biowarfare hazard detection, and we got our system to work pretty well, but I always think of it like this. We trained a pony and took it to the Derby, and so did a bunch of other people, and there were some faster ponies. So that one didn't pan out, but it was a pretty cool company.
Well, it's interesting because you come from the MIT world, which, of course, I think, didn't MIT produce the A123 project for the battery technology?
A123 batteries, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, so can you talk a little bit about, the role that you see in startups and angel funding and venture capital and all that stuff in the automotive industry?
In the auto industry? Well, let's see. My auto industry knowledge is really limited to a few years I spent in Dearborn with Ford. And there wasn't a whole lot.
Oh, the real past comes out.
The dark years.
The dark years.
Yeah, if you think about what's going on with the automotive industry, we're going to see a transfer to fuel efficiency. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. in the startup community, and I think there's going to be a transition to different fuel sources. For example, A123 and using a battery-powered car, or people working in the hydrogen fuel space. And I think that smaller companies maybe coming with academic roots where people aren't so pressured for the bottom line while they're doing their research, I think that can evolve into viable companies. And A123 is a great example. I mean, those guys started off making batteries, and their first customer was DeWalt Power Drills. That's how they got their foot in the door. And look what they're doing now.
Well, I guess to broaden it beyond the auto industry a little bit, maybe the role of startups against what are really large incumbent industries. So whether it's going up against the LGs of the world making batteries or the energy industry, how do you see a startup sort of going into something like that has a pretty entrenched system already and a pretty high cost bar to entry?
Here's the role of a startup company. Years ago, people compete to make the best typewriter. And nobody even owns a typewriter anymore. It's been completely eliminated by word processors. Somebody invented a computer with a word processor, and the typewriter's gone. That's the role of a startup company. People are going down a path, and there's a lot of money and a lot of momentum that's invested in trying to make incremental improvements. But the startup is trying to do something completely different. Right? What if we didn't do this the same way? What if we didn't make an incremental improvement? What if we tried to do something that was radically different? That's where the startup can play a role. And everybody's imagination put together can come up with so many different ideas for every different industry. And if you have the right team, if you have the right concept, then it's possible to go and find funding. And in 2008 there was a pretty decent hit to our economy, and funding wasn't necessarily available. It wasn't readily available. But that's the rumor. In my experience, though, I think the funding is there. I think people are just a little bit more selective, but the funding is there. People pulled their money out of the economy, and they're looking for other opportunities. And if you've got a good idea and you've got a good team, then it's just a matter of networking to the right individuals that can provide that capital.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up about something like a typewriter. I know that someone, and it might be an urban myth, but someone recently was telling me the story of how Westinghouse, I think it was, that they were telling me had a program where everybody worked 4 days a week back in the ye old days. And the fifth day, everyone still came to work, but they were allowed to work on their own projects. Only the company owned the patent of whatever they ended up developing. So they were working with the best and the brightest engineers to develop these amazing ideas that people always wanted to try to do, and now that's become privatized.
There's another company out there. There's another company out there that people are more familiar with than Westinghouse these days. Google has the same program. That's a great idea. It's a way to foster innovation and the whole startup mentality within a larger organization. I think that's where a significant amount of innovation comes from. When people feel like they own it, it's kind of like children, I think. If you're watching somebody else's children, that's a lot different than watching your own. You put a lot more care into your own, and you're willing to stick with them, even in the downtimes. Companies like that. It's your own company. When things turn south, you don't run. It's your company. You have to stick by it, just like family. And giving people that ownership over an idea, it's empowering, and it'll help you get through some of the issues that you encounter along the way. Nothing ever ends up the way you start. When I started this company, I really thought it was a renewable energy company, and that seemed pretty sexy at the time. And 5 years into it, I realized, man, we're a wastewater treatment company. I have to swim in artificial feces sometimes. It's it's not that glamorous, and it's not that sexy. It's dirty.
You have big old waiter boots, you mean?
I have gone scuba diving inside of our digester before, and it takes.
Oh my God! It brings new meaning to swimming in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've got clothes that have had this same smell for 2 years, and it won't go out. I just kind of reserve them for some of the dirty things, And it takes like a week to get it off of your skin. My wife hates it, but it's just one of those things you have to do. There was this one time when, this is a funny story, when you start up an anaerobic digester, you have to seed it with bacteria from another digester. We don't have to, but it makes the process, it cuts a year out of the cycle time, so you do it. And we got a bunch of digester waste from, there's a local municipal wastewater treatment plant that has an anaerobic digester. And we took their stuff and we put it into our digester. And there was this premix tank before our digester that has a place where we can pump off from a truck. So we pumped it all in there, and then we pumped it into our digester. Well, there was a filter basket in there, and you just would not believe the things that came out of that filter basket. Just nasty. Like sometimes you could get a 5-pound wad of condoms out of that filter basket. When we started to pump this tank down, we started to get this filter basket clogged with human hair on a regular basis. And eventually we decided, you know what, we just don't want to pump this tank down too much because it keeps clogging our filter basket with its hair, and it's nasty. So we decided to always leave about 3 feet of liquid in this tank to avoid that problem. At the same time, we were trying to dose this thing with a chemical called calcium hydroxide, which helps us control the pH of the digester because the bugs like they thrive better at a neutral pH. So we've got all this calcium hydroxide going into it, and we know there's a bunch of hair in there. And after operating like this for 5 months, we realized that we needed to actually drain this tank. We tried to pump it out. We pumped out as much as we could until we kept getting it clogged with this pubic hair. And one time we actually had to pull the cover off of this tank and go in and investigate. We looked in, and it was pitch black. There's no light that goes into it except for the manway that we took off. It was pitch black, and we took a rake and pushed it out there, and we pulled some of this hair. And what we had was about 8 inches of this lime, which is really white. It looks like whipped cream, covered by about 4 inches of human hair. And my buddy who was with me, he looked at it, and he's like, "Oh, dude, I am never eating shepherd's pie again."
Oh.
But so those are the kinds of things you get into. It's not really a sexy business. It's
so it kind of makes petroleum fuel look clean.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to use Essex Junction's effluent to seed our digester again.
Oy. Well, we talked about the beer and then yogurt, of course, and Ben & Jerry's is doing their things. What other industries would be primed for this?
There's ethanol manufacturing is actually very prime. Ethanol manufacturing is not that different from beer. You start off making beer, and then you distill the beer to get the ethanol. All the byproducts are the same. You got rinse water, you got yeast, and you've got the spent grain. And ethanol can be anything from transportation ethanol to bourbon. We've had a few calls from large ethanol producers and toured their plants, and we're trying to figure out if we can make the economics favorable there. And certainly in the bourbon industry, we can do something a lot better than what they do with their waste right now. And both of those industries, like the beer industry, they consume a lot of energy that you can pump right back into the plant.
But doesn't ethanol get, really political? I mean, just when you're talking about, corn production, if you were to start going for some of that stuff, I know people that are vehemently, anti-E85, right?
So, well, I think the ethanol industry is here to stay. We just saw Congress increase the allowance from 10 to 15% in the states, and we've got really 3 giants out there. We've got Archer Daniels and Valero, and third one's not coming to me. Poet is the biggest, and they have a lot of byproduct. And right now, really, the only use they have for the byproduct is to feed it to cattle. But at some point, you're going to have more of this byproduct than you have cattle. What are you going to do with it? That's a risk for them. You can't landfill it. It's too expensive to landfill it. I don't think treating the byproduct is really that political. The ethanol component might be. What I worry about more about the ethanol industry is the pinch between the price of corn and the price of a barrel of oil. Right now, a barrel of oil over $100, and the price of corn is what, 7.5 or 8? It's a pretty narrow margin. If you can split those up a little bit more, then ethanol makes a little bit more sense. But really, the value of your ethanol, unsubsidized, it's as much as you buy your gasoline for. So it's $4 a gallon. If your input cost, if the corn cost continues to go up, then you just might not be able to make ethanol at $4 a gallon. In which case, of course, you'd go into the bourbon industry where you can sell it for $30 a fifth.
Exactly. Isn't it kind of amazing how expensive it is comparatively?
I heard this story one time, and I can't validate it, but I heard it from a pretty reliable source. He said that a lot of the vodka that you buy is just ethanol produced by people like Cargill, and then they add. So when you produce the ethanol, you end up with something that's 199 proof, right? It's pure ethanol, and then they add water to it to get it down to 80 proof or whatever they're selling it for, and then they start adding flavoring. So now you've seen over the last decade a huge transition in the vodka market to having Currant flavored or all kinds of different flavorings added to your vodka. And that's just for market separation, because otherwise they're all just Cargill ethanol with local water added to them and put in a bottle. So they're buying this stuff at $4 a gallon, and then they're selling it at $30 a fifth or $150 a gallon. That seems like a pretty good industry to be in, doesn't it?
Chelsea?
There's no difference, really. It's ethanol. Ethanol is ethanol.
That is interesting. I mean, and especially when you add in the water component and, how precious our water is actually, compared to people don't even realize what they're paying for water, right, when they buy bottled water. So it is kind of funny, the markup on the vodka.
Yeah, it's bottled water. You have to pay for all that transportation cost. Bottle it in Maine with your Poland Spring, and then you have to truck it all over the country. You have to pay for all that diesel fuel.
Right, or you could fuel it with brewery waste.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'm personally a tap water guy myself. Or Magic Cat beer.
Same here. Even in California, I'm not scared of it. I don't know where it comes from. It's coming in a bottle. Well, cool. I think Chelsea might have dropped off the line. Are you still there, Chelsea? See, I think she might have fallen off. Maybe her internet connection. Oh, she's there! Yay!
I was making snarky comments about the quality of our drinking water. If you can't chew it, it's not water.
Yeah, I just watched that movie Tapped, which is like half propaganda but half interesting.
You know what's kind of funny, coincidental about that movie is it's the same producer as our movies.
Oh, Eric, I'm sure you know that she was, in Who Killed the Electric Car, and then produced, right? Produced?
Small
Revenge of the Electric Car?
We're a small producer, but our real producer is a woman named Jessica.
It's only because you're like small in stature, honey.
You're very kind. No, our real producer is Jessie Dieter, and so she produced both films and also Tapped.
Oh, that's great. I haven't seen either movie, but that sounds pretty exciting. You like being in the film industry?
I moonlight in it, and that's plenty for me. I much prefer playing with cars.
Well, it must have been funny, right, Chelsea? I mean, I don't think in Who Killed the Electric Car you were out to become a film star, right? Like you were actually just a participant in the whole event of what happened around the EV1. And I'm sure, Eric, you're familiar with the EV1 and how they crushed the cars in California. And it's kind of funny. I have a daughter who, when I first started talking to Chelsea, she was like, that was the biggest film star she'd ever heard of. I was talking to Chelsea Sexton.
We have to get her out more. But no, you're right. And actually, we still kid about it because I wasn't originally supposed to be in it. didn't know I was in it until I went to see it and was a little bit surprised. So Jesse still teases me to this day about my gullibility when they said to me, we're only going to use 2 seconds of your interview. Apparently the oldest trick in the book.
Right. How much did they use?
A little more than 2 seconds.
Oh, yeah, a lot. You should see the movie, Eric. Maybe we need to next do the let's drink beer, and we'll feature Eric for 2 seconds.
Perfect.
I'm up for that.
No, beer will definitely happen the next time we are all together.
Yeah, you should.
Well,
it's a fun tour because you might think you're coming to see a brewery, and you might think you're coming to see a biogas plant, but you can see both. We walk around on the floor. They've got an awesome sampling room at Magic Hat. They usually have about 10 different beers on tap. My favorite right now is Blind Faith. It's an IPA that they just brought back from the dead, and then we can go look at the biogas plant and see how bacteria convert the waste into renewable biofuels.
I'm shooting a segment up there. We got to do this.
I was going to say, we need a field trip.
I'm in.
Open invite. We're actually having a tour on the 27th. There's a group of USDA engineers that are coming. I think there's going to be 50 people that are coming for the tour. We're trying to figure out how we can get 50 people to see a presentation at the same time, because I don't know if we have enough open space for that.
We have to come from the West Coast. Dan, we should send you as our correspondent.
I'm gonna head up to the New England Forest Rally in the middle of July 15th and 16th. If I could stop on the way up, that would be 2 birds with one. What am I driving?
One go.
Yeah.
You'd save fuel.
Yeah.
That's true.
I'd burn tape and save fuel.
I would be happy to have you.
Cool. Thanks.
Do you have a CNG vehicle?
No CNG. My own. People always ask, what do I drive? I drive a little Honda 2-seater, and one day I'll get a diesel.
Yeah, go on. It's an S2000.
Yeah,
go
well,
on, say it.
You have a BMW and a Mustang, so no teasing. So yeah, one day I'll have something that runs on alternative fuel, but next week.
I get teased a lot because I'm in the renewable energy space, and I drive a full-size pickup. So I'm kind of limited because I do have 3 kids, and they're triplets, and you really need a full-size 4-door pickup in order to fit 3 car seats in the back seat. I used to have a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and you just can't get 3 car seats in a Grand Cherokee. But I also tow a lot, being that I'm a biogas developer. I'm always towing a trailer full of something, whether it be 5,000 pounds of lime or a couple of 3,000-pound air compressors or something like that. You need to pull out that E85 and run it in a flex fuel vehicle. Create your own fuel and burn it yourself. And the new Grand Cherokee will burn E85. Not sure what else, but it's a good one. That's a real good one. I like that Grand Cherokee, but like I said, it doesn't fit my family.
Yeah, the Durango. Then look at the Durango, because it's the same. I think it's the same platform, same flex fuel engine, and it's a winner.
I drive a 4-door Dodge pickup, and I love it. It's on the highway.
A diesel Cummins engine?
No, it's got the 5.7, and on the highway it shuts down 4. So if I can keep it under 70, I get better than 20 miles per gallon. But if I need it, I got 407 foot-pounds of torque.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you're not driving a Suburban with 11 miles per gallon.
I'll do it a little bit better than the Suburban.
You could convert that to CNG, though, couldn't you?
Yes, I would love to do that. I don't think that I'm the guy that's actually going to produce a converted vehicle. Maybe there could be somebody else that converts vehicles to CNG.
Oh, yeah. Go get it done.
Man, I would love to participate in that because I'm going to have as much CNG as I can use. It'd be nice to be able to reduce my fuel cost a little bit. I do about 40,000 miles a year. Man, that pump starts to rack up some cost.
I'll go find some links for you.
Okay, well, I think with that, Chelsea, are we done with our first podcast?
I think we are. We have all survived.
Eric, I invite you to stay on the phone because we will continue this conversation for yet another couple of hours. And you can actually interact with some of the people that maybe weren't like Dan and brave enough to push *6. So thank you so much. Eric Fitch from PurposeEnergy, making some biofuel out of brewery waste. We really appreciate you being here. Awesome.
Well, let me thank you for letting me have the opportunity. And I'll tell you what, I'll look for a little bit if there's some questions that come up in the next while, and I'll stay on and answer them.
Cool. If you want to go online and look at the chat room, see if anybody's asking questions that aren't on the phone, it's bit.ly/open line. And there's a whole chat room there that people are, I'm sure, asking questions. And thank you so much. So, Chelsea, what? I think Ben, this is when you stop recording.
Your conference recording has stopped.
I like that you got the little snort in there just in time.
Q&A queue is cleared.
Yeah, the little traditional snort had to come in. Oops.
Q&A session is over.
So, okay, who's left on the line?
I'm still here.
Oh, finally.
Finally, Mud Monster.
I'm here.
Meet our guest.
If he's there.
I know Chelsea's this is Chelsea's first show with me, like full on, and she's probably like, why does she know everyone's voices?
No, this doesn't surprise me at all.
That's scary. That you actually know my voice. Ugh.
Oh my God, imagine that.
Hi, Michelle, it's Roger.
Roger, we've missed you. I've missed you. Well, I've been offline for 2 months, so. What's new, Roger?
Focus Titanium sitting in my driveway.
Oh my God! Did you buy your ex-wife the matching one so it matched?
No, she hasn't seen it yet. Actually, it's it's interesting.
Show. He had the Fiesta, and he bought his ex-wife the matching Fiesta.
Yeah. Yep. As part of the settlement. Although I don't want her to see this because she's going to regret saying, I should have stayed married to you.
Okay, so you got the Focus Titanium.
Choice, but it's a titanium it's an interesting trim package. I got a titanium with no options. So it has nice wheels, the My Ford Touch and the high-end electronics, but it has heated cloth seats that only Ford seems to be offering, like the Euro cars that we offer.
I don't think I've ever seen heated cloth.
Go to Europe.
Yeah, Europe has them.
Yep.
Our little smart car has them.
Your what?
My husband drives a little smart car. The 3-cylinder reference earlier, and it has cloth seats with heat.
What it is, the American companies thought, well, if you're going to spend money on heated seats, you're going to pay the money for our fake leather that we're going to put on it, or our 2 square inches of leather that we call leather that's rest vinyl.
Leather trim, I guess they referred.
Yeah.
No, I love heat, but I'd often prefer the cloth.
Right, and that's how I am too. I had a Fiesta with that too. Fiesta started it. We had Fiestas that had cloth heated seats, and we still do. That's sort of a, hey, look at Ford. We're bringing over European trends. Not just symbolic stuff. We're bringing over cloth heated seats for the geeks who really pay attention to that stuff. But it's loaded. It's a titanium with no options. So it's got all the electronic doodads, the wheels, the Conti contact wheel tires. But
what are the options above loaded? I'm confused.
Well, the parallel parking option, which I didn't get. The rear car, which I didn't get. And the leather seats I didn't get. Everything else comes on a base titanium, and any dealer can order it. It's very cool. It doesn't cost much more than an actual, and you know what? They don't charge too terribly much more for it. So it looks like the high option car. It has leather and all that stuff, but it doesn't.
Did you get the hatch or the four or the
I got
four-door?
sedan. Sedan looks better, I think. In my opinion, I think the Fiesta hatch looks better, but the Focus sedan looks better. That's my opinion, but.
Well, as the telematics, whatever you call it, guy at Ford, I'm going to tell you something. I just had an MKZ hybrid, and I think Ford is a little bit racist. How did it know I was Mexican? Every time I would say to sync CNN, it would say CNN en español.
the racist speech reco. I have a buddy I could tell that to. I'm going to tell it to tomorrow.
It was I could not get CNN to save my life. I'm serious. It was driving me nuts.
CNN en español.
CNN en español.
Like, I don't know if it was geodating me or what was going on.
That's funny.
Otherwise, it was
how'd
nice
you
to
like
hear
the MKZ hybrid, the no extra cost hybrid? How'd you like that?
It was very comfortable, and I took out some coworkers to work, and we shoved like 5 of us in it, and it was like if I shoved 5 people into a 5 Series, just space-wise in the back seat, having 3 people in the back seat.
It's not comfy.
It's not like Grandpa's Lincoln, right? And I enjoyed driving it. I think at one point I was like competing against myself, going like, "Oh, I'm only getting 36 miles per gallon," but
yeah, they have that in the Focus. They have like a little green leaf thing how you're driving.
Right. And my daughter
was
sure I like the leaves. She's like, "You're getting more leaves." And at the end of the day, if I'd been driving my Z3, I would have been getting 26 maybe. So I have nothing to complain about. Like, that's a huge kind of leap, right? I didn't have to put much gas in it before I gave it back to them.
Yeah. But was it fun to drive? Probably not.
I kind of had some weird moments where I think I was getting distracted by the little monitors that are telling me what MPGs I'm getting, where, I would, like, start to go into a curve, and I'd be like, oh, wait, I'm starting to jump to 0. And I would, like, start hanging up traffic behind me.
The police would like it. It's actually a police-friendly feature.
It definitely is on the 405 in L.A.
Well, getting good gas mileage is always a police-friendly feature unless they're willing to pull people over driving too freaking slow. I almost said the full F word, but...
We're not recording anymore.
Are you a cop? Cool. I'm not going anywhere. But I don't know. I've you know what? The thing that impresses me most about those hybrids that we build is that you can drive 40 miles per hour and still have the air conditioning compressor on and be on battery power.
Yeah.
That's better than anything the Volt tries to do. I mean, my opinion. But you know me, I'm a Volt hater, so.
Well, you've come to a good party for that.
Chelsea, I don't know about you, but I know that every journalist that I know that's had the Volt for longer than, I've driven it around downtown LA, before lunch or something one time for like half an hour. But every journalist has gone like, oh yeah, the Volt is so much fun to drive. Well, what mode did you have it in?
Yeah.
And they're all like sport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. You gotta have it in sport and low together.
Yeah.
Saying a Volt is fun to drive is like saying that the 8th grade dance was a lot of fun.
Well, look, in fairness, it is so far the most robust, if that's the word, driving experience of this generation of plug-ins, excluding the Tesla Roadster. So you can trash the Volt in terms of being fast and sporty, which means you have to trash everything else with a plug on it.
Yeah.
So, it's all in what you're comparing it to. But
but I question the whole merit of the plug-in anyway. The plug-in is sort of a look, I'm green, I'm plugging this car in, but I still have a gas engine.
So we need to get the green thing out of it. Green, just needs to like get onto the back burner of the stove.
Yep.
And we need to look at.
It's going to be normalized. I mean, we knew like 4 years ago that people that, or when, let's go back a little bit more than that. The people that initially bought the Prius were doing it, had particular not psychological.
No, it is psychological. No, it is psychological.
Yeah,
you hit the right word. You hit the right word there,
Michelle. They tended to be
Michelle.
more artistic. They were more left-leaning. It became like a status symbol thing because as, people become, artistic movements move through culture and they filter down. It becomes more and more widespread. And it is a status symbol at this point to have a hybrid thing on your car. At some point, it'll get normalized, right?
No, it's normalized now, I think. I think it's normalized now, personally. I think they're trying to up it by saying that it's a plug-in. That's the next level of green badge. But the plug-in doesn't buy you much at all. In fact, I'd say a Prius or a Fusion hybrid or whatever strong hybrid is a better solution for the planet than anything like the Volt, which is a science fair project. That's my opinion. But
so how much time have you spent driving it?
What's that? I've driven it. I've driven
how many miles?
200 miles.
And how much of that was on electric and how much of it was on the generator?
Probably about half and half.
So was it a normal week where you would plug it in and commute and then and then come back?
No, I didn't have access to it like a normal week. I'll tell you, my normal week, I would probably be, because I would, in this time of year, I'd have the climate control on, and I go just beyond the envelope of it. I'd be on the range extender probably about 25% of the time, like most people would be, if not more.
Well,
so the whole idea, here's my problem with it, is people try to believe that they're going to be on this battery the whole time, and the reality is most people are going to be on the range extender at least 25 or more % of the time.
And on the range extender, it'll still run in the 40s.
That's the dirty. Well, no, it doesn't. It runs 25 miles per gallon, 30 miles.
No, it doesn't.
If you drive like a maniac,
I've seen the test of it. I saw what I did with it. I got about 30.
Then you got to change the way you drive.
No,
you
got to learn how to drive the car. You have to realize that as technology changes, you need to learn to drive the cars the way they were built to be driven.
I don't even think it's that. Look, any vehicle's mileage is going to vary depending on your right foot. It doesn't matter if it's gas, electric, whatever.
Absolutely.
So we'll just leave it there. It has nothing to do with it being Volt specific. Anyone, I can get in that car or another one and get more than the sticker says or less, depending on my mood that day. Whether the Volt or a plug-in hybrid makes sense depends entirely on your driving patterns. The vast majority of people, 70%, drive less than 40 miles a day. Those people will not be on gas as much as you think. If you're somebody that will be driving a lot on gas in the Volt is not the car for you. I mean, let's not pretend otherwise. If you're somebody that basically does the 30, 40, 50 miles and every once in a while goes further, the Volt could be a very good car for you. That serial configuration versus a Prius that's always on gas at highway speeds, or the Ford plug-in hybrids that are coming will always be on gas on highway speeds, the Volt at least allows you to drive days or weeks on electric only if you happen to be a mostly local driver. That's entirely the point of the car. But, in theory, if you're only a local driver, you get a pure EV. If you're a reasonably local driver that occasionally has longer range needs, then you get a Volt. But if you're driving any of these things for the purposes with which they're not intended to be their sweet spot, you're not going to have an ideal experience. But that's not the fault of the Volt, the fault of the car you pick.
Wait, there's one feature there's one dirty secret of the Volt that people don't want to talk about in all plugins, is the fact that they're targeted at urban users. And I'm an urban user half the time. I live in Chicago and I live in Detroit. I do not have a place where I could ever plug in Chicago.
Well,
and that's the target. And that's the target.
Right, Cars.com had their Volt that they purchased, right? And I think that was one of their biggest problems before they got it in a wreck, was that the staff who was using their long-term Volt driver couldn't, for the most part, most of them couldn't charge it on a daily basis.
Right. They're on the range extender all the time. That's what I would be, and that's what this is what happens when you have people from the 50-year-old men from the Detroit suburbs designing vehicles for the urban market. They have no clue because they don't live there. there is no place to charge an EV or a plug-in. You're living on the range extender. So you've made a huge business decision based on non-factual data.
Well, except that if you're somebody, first of all, not all urban dwellers can't plug in. I lived in an apartment for all of the years I've worked on EV1 and never had a charger at home, and 12 of them maintained.
Where did you live?
I live in a small community right next to LAX.
Oh, you live in LA. Oh, you live in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Try it in Chicago and try it in New York.
No, I understand. My point is, if you're somebody that knows you're not going to be able to plug in, you're not going to buy a plug-in car. But that doesn't mean that nobody in any urban community has access to a plug.
I understand that, but you hear the marketing spin that these companies lay out there. That this is the perfect for the urban commuter or the near-urban commuter. Most of those people have no place to plug in. Either at their work or...
vastly overstating it. Some people have no access to a plug. You're totally right. At the same time, for those that have access to a plug, these are urban vehicles, and I don't think that's a dirty secret. We're pretty open about it.
Wow.
You guys, I grew up in New Mexico, and Roswell, which is... I know, explains everything. It's 180 miles to Lubbock, to Albuquerque, to El Paso. Most of the daily driving that you would do in Roswell, New Mexico, which is like a lot of communities across the Midwest and the Southwest, and, probably a lot of the Northeast too, is going to be people driving far less than 40 miles. But when they want to take that once-a-month trip to the big metropolis, a Volt would suit them. So I don't know why the marketing is around urban dwellers, because...
Well, that's a whole other matter. I think the marketing is probably wrong, and that's the point, is that these people who are marketing it don't have a clue of what the sweet spot for it is. I think it's suburban commuters is where the suburban commuters who have to go to work, have a place to plug in at night, are the people they should be selling it to. But they're trying to be cool and selling it to the hipsters. The hipsters are not the right people. The hipsters are not the right people.
It's more about the limited markets that they're trying to release it to, just in terms of getting it out there and where's going to be the biggest uptake, right? Like trying to go into someplace like Roswell, New Mexico, and go like, okay, now everybody has to have a Volt.
Well, then why is
it insignificant because there's a population of 30,000 people?
Why is GM trying to sell the Volt in Detroit? That makes no sense. Makes absolutely no sense.
Or Canada, where
it's cold.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go.
So Roger.
Yeah. But I think Canada makes a lot of sense.
Let's be clear. GM is selling the Volt in Detroit because it's in Michigan and because that's where they're built. Just like Nissan is selling in Tennessee because they're based there for the Leaf. When Tennessee is not the market you think of. So they have to do the home court. So
actually,
we have to set that aside.
Nissan, and I've been talking extensively about the Leaf. And actually, I think the Leaf is a more bold statement than the Volt, but that's another matter for another discussion. But
I think Canada makes a lot of sense.
Well, they're bold in different ways.
Minnesota make a lot of sense.
How does Canada make sense?
In the colder climates, parking lots, they have power outlets already
for block heaters.
Block heaters.
Yeah.
Right? You can
but
that's not enough juice. But that's not enough juice to charge these guys.
Most states in northern North America have power outlets that are there for the purposes of charging the trucking community, because those people get charged according to using gasoline if they're idling, waiting to deliver something. So they allow parking.
Or even passenger cars. I had a Mercedes diesel I had to plug in at night around where I live. I mean, I played with a lot of different technology in my life. But yeah, there's not enough juice in a 110 outlet for these things. You really need
plug-in hybrids there are.
Not really. No, not really.
Yes, really.
Yeah,
14 hours. What's the Volt say?
14 hours.
10 hours. 20 amps. That's a lot.
How long?
10 hours.
10 hours on a standard, like garage charger? I don't think so.
Well, if you're parked overnight anyway. I mean, they're not. 110's not good for.
Charge to get home.
Well,
110's not good for any EV, other than the golf cart. 110's not good for any EV but a golf cart.
Now you're just sprouting nonsense.
No, I'm not. Sprouting. I've had these things. I've actually driven them. I've had them at my home.
So I charge the Volt a number of times overnight.
I have a 220 outlet in my home, actually.
10 amps at 100 volts, right? What's that, 1,000 watts for 8 hours? So you can get 8,000 watts into your car during the workday, and that's if you're a slacker and you only work for 8 hours. That's definitely going to get you home.
Yeah, at home and at work. 110 is fine.
Not drive it to lunch. Not drive it to lunch and not forget to plug it in. That's the problem.
Well, if you have a Volt, you get home.
The same is true if you have a different infrastructure there, right? If there's any infrastructure and you forget to plug it in, it doesn't matter if it's 110 or if it's something else.
No, with a gas tank, you fill it up. You stop and fill it up. With a gas tank, you stop and fill it up if you need to.
Which you do in the Volt?
No, you don't have the same thing. There's far more gas stations than plugs.
But if you don't have a fuel tank, then you're obviously paying a lot more attention to when you're plugging in. Every time you stop, you want to plug in the place. So
it's like riding my Harley to work. I have to worry about weather. I don't like to get wet.
Northern climates where there's already infrastructure in all the parking lots to plug in and be able to get 8,000 watts while you're at work. I think that's a great.
I was actually talking to a neighbor of mine who does concrete fixtures in places like that. He's doing an EV play for a kiosk for charging electric vehicles. And he said to me, there's so many standards for plugging in electric vehicles. What do I need to engineer to? And I'm like, well, it's still early. And he said, well, that's expensive to figure out how many different plugs I need to support. And I'm like, yeah, that's the early stage adopter stuff.
Except that we're standardized on one plug, and it's actually much easier than you think. But the issue here is not whether
on one plug, because the ones at the Meyer stores here at my place don't support the Focus or even the Volt, is what people have told me. I mean, I've heard complaints that the Meyer stores by me that have plugs don't support the things they're actually shipping.
Anything that's put in now will support everything except the Tesla Roadster.
Maybe the thought isn't to try to create a new vehicle plug. The thought is to try to create a better battery. If you look at what the A123 model is, they have a battery that has a matrix in it, and it's the whole point is the microstructure doesn't create a crack. Historically, the problems with batteries is they've had a crack, and it's separated parts of the battery, and you have this limited lifetime.
They short out.
When you charge it, it actually makes it strain, so it gets bigger and smaller, and you can get these stress cracks. But they've got this matrix that prevents that, so you can charge it faster, and you don't have that long-term life instability.
Well,
maybe if you standardize on the existing infrastructure with your battery and your charging system, maybe that's the way to go.
Well, that's where I think the national labs can really play. I think EVs are ultimately going to be a solution, but what has to happen is there has to be a global standard for how they're charged and what battery technology underlying there is. And I think the national labs, along with CERN and the other things in Asia that can come up with a global standard for this stuff, will eventually make this a problem that's in the past. But in the meantime, all these individual company approaches are science fair projects. I'm sorry, that's where I'm at with it. I see it.
You need to get over your issues. And get a little more research.
I'll tell you what.
Well,
I'm going to buy a car if I can just plug it into the outlet that exists in my garage or that exists in the parking lot of my office before I'm going to buy one that needs some kind of special kiosk in order to charge it.
Well, you know what? Then you got a problem. You got a mathematical problem with how electricity works. Then.
Well, this is
or you got to buy a fusion hybrid or a strong hybrid like we have now. I mean, that's why I mean the fusion hybrid or the Prius has solved the problem of the electricity distribution for the short term. Until we come up with a better solution, I think the strong hybrids are the answer right now.
They are the answer for some people. The issue here is that you're expecting an EV or a plug-in hybrid to work for everybody before it's useful for anybody. And that's just not – there's no single car on the road today that's the car for everybody. So the only question that really matters is, are there enough people who could buy it and use it to make a business case out of it? And most automakers seem to think there is.
Okay, if there's a IRR or MPV that can make and you know what, most automakers have determined that there is an IRR or MPV that for a science fair project car that will be a niche that will keep us in in people's minds as a green company, but it's not mass market. Don't delude yourself. They're not going to sell 500,000 of these things. No way.
Hybrids weren't mass market when they started either. No, I understand. I haven't heard anybody suggest that EVs are mass market.
Yeah, but right, I understand that. But if they understand that there's a niche market for it, but you hear Dan Ackerson saying that Volt is the solution for everything. We're going to have 3 shifts building the Volt. We're going to sell 1 million of these things. That's BS. Total BS.
Well, I mean, I think we all have our issues with Dan Ackerson, right? I mean, he's, the guy wants to globalize just 4 engines worldwide.
Yeah, but, I mean, do you expect any corporate CEO to get up and not make big promises about his product? Shall we talk about Ford?
Yeah, but he's also killing Cadillac at the same time when he's talking. He's kind of a tool.
Like Michelle said, we all have our issues with him, but it doesn't surprise me, and nor do I fault him by saying he thinks the Volt's an answer, just like he'd say, the other vehicles are.
No, my point is the Volt. I would agree. The Volt has an audience, so do all plugins, but it's a far bigger niche than the people who purport to support plugins think it is. That's my point.
You just justified what you're trying to not justify.
I know.
Is there a rewind? Let's go back.
There's a rewind. Rewind to say what you want to say.
Yeah.
So, Roger, any new deep Ford products that you want to spill on us that we're not supposed to know about?
No, they made me sign some kind of paperwork recently. I can't talk about it, but I can talk about my Focus Titanium. I can talk about that because I own it for the time being. But you know what? I do think I'm really a big fan of strong hybrids because I drove one at the track and I was like flogging it pretty hard. It was still on battery. I was pretty impressed with that.
Okay, what was this thing this week? And I just briefly put it on Facebook, and I didn't have a chance to really go look at it. But Ian, who is popping color on color with a U in the UK sense, on Twitter, who does all the artwork around cars, was on the racetrack with a Leaf Nismo.
Oh yeah, I saw that. That was interesting. Yeah.
Chelsea, have you heard about that?
Yeah, it's a racing concept based on the Leaf. Obviously, slightly different internal components.
It's still the same headlights, which I loved.
Yeah, no, it's a wicked fun-looking car. I'd love to get into
I go to school with a Nissan executive. I'm going to ask him about it this weekend.
Roger,
yeah.
Are you familiar with the NASCAR Fords? And
not really.
An explanation for why Ford did so well at Talladega and the races where they can draft?
No, I don't. I have never been a NASCAR fan. I've been to a couple races and I don't remember them because I drank too much.
That was quite
impressive.
Isn't that the point in NASCAR? They started off the season with all the, what were they, 1, 2, 3, and 5 at Talladega or something like that?
I don't know. That's interesting. Although I'm selling my Harley, Michelle. My Harley's up for sale. My girlfriend's making me get off a bike and get onto 4 wheels, so I've got to find something cooler.
Off of 4 wheels, but you also bicycle a lot too.
I do bicycle a lot, but no, but I need to get off a Harley. She's afraid I'm going to get my ass kicked by a car.
I think I'd have the same position.
Yeah. So I'm looking at old Mustangs. And I had a guy offer to trade my Harley for a vet, a custom vet, and I'm thinking about that too. Me with a GM. Oh my God.
Oh my God, the world's going to end. Well, you know, I do want to bring it back to the NASCAR thing because it is interesting that I am like a huge proponent that the best technological advancements actually happen in racing because that's where stuff actually gets to be tested. That's why I'm so fascinated with this Leaf Nismo. And I guess NASCAR's trying its stuff.
Well,
right?
and actually who's really trying on the electrification side right now is Indy. You know, they just held their first Emerging Technology Day, and in their 100th anniversary celebration kind of decided that, you know, as all racing started, not just as a spectator sport, but to drive automotive technology development, that they wanted to get back to that. So they hosted 3 different EV-based racing circuits. They invited anybody with a plug-in car to bring it out and take a lap on the track and want to make an annual thing out of both sort of celebrating the ownership of it, but more the emerging technology and driving that. And there's some interest in incorporating it into the actual circuit, not necessarily mixed in with regular cars, but as a separate circuit.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because it's not just fuel technologies, right? It's everything it's kind of like SEMA being brought into racing. Like it's, right. Okay, go make the best transmission, go make the best,
right?
Whatever.
And it's a hearts and minds issue too. I mean, to all the angst over the environmentalism, that's been the smallest group of people to ever buy plug-in cars, the cause-oriented folks. The geeks are the middle group, love the technology, and the biggest group by far has always been, I want it because it's cool, fast, fun, new thing to have. And we completely forget that when it comes to plug-in cars, and we try to make them into these glorified appliances. So, torque sells, and AC motors have a lot of torque, so no reason not to capitalize on that.
Yeah, there's a play. Yeah, there's a play here. There's really a play here.
What's that?
I think that if they market the EV or electrification thing in racing, I think it's going to go a long way. I think it will.
Yeah, well, how about what Porsche's done, like at Petit Le Mans?
Right.
I was there and I watched their little hybrid run well, and it's done really well since then in that circuit.
Yeah, I mean, and forget, the size of its market, but that is exactly what Tesla has sold on, is performance. And it's, not something I can afford, but...
Well, make no mistake, in 20 years, we're all going to be buying EVs of some kind, whether they're hybrids or full EVs. I think 20 years from now, that's what we're going to be. Who's going to be
Do you really believe
the players?
That?
Oh, I think so, yeah. I do think so. Either hybrids or pure EVs.
Or the best technology?
No, I think it's both. I think there's going to be people who I think they'll have solved the battery problem to a large extent in 20 years, and I think that the 40-mile and under commute people will have something that's figured out. Just not right now. It's just not the Volt. Just not GM. I mean, that's my opinion.
Well, Roger, let me ask you this: you are a legend, employee, right? Didn't your father work in the industry?
No, my father sued the industry, but that's a whole
Oh my God, did he invent the windshield wiper?
No, more labor stuff, but yeah. No, I've been involved. I've been working on cars since I was, single digit age, and I do think electrification's coming. I just don't think it's with what we know now today. And I think it's premature. I think what you're seeing with the Volt is look at us, we're green, we can do this, and it's a science fair project. My opinion.
Well,
that wasn't my experience, but okay.
Yeah, nor mine, and it kind of belittles all the people that work so hard on it.
Well, just because people work hard on things doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to be a success. The history's littered with people who've worked very hard on things that haven't been a success. I think it's political. I think it's
no
premature.
Question it's political. But look, I've driven a lot of plug-in science fair projects. But you've been driving the true science fair projects that wouldn't have won the blue medal, the blue ribbon. Now it's becoming, at least they're in the ballpark. But no, I know. Well, look, I've drove all the EVs of the last generation. I've driven a ton of them from this generation, and I've built a lot of things that are true science fair projects. What we're seeing coming out of OEMs these days, Nissan Leaf, Volt, etc., not science fair quality. Gen 1, absolutely. Niche products, absolutely. Not science fair.
Yeah, maybe I'm using the word science fair a little too loosely, but at the same time, my mom and dad aren't going to drive one. There's no way.
Well, you're right, because Roger, what you're looking at is early adopters being the beta testers, right?
Yeah, you're right. They're willing to tolerate the issues with it. They're willing to tolerate they can't charge in a lot of places. But personally, in talking to some Nissan executives who I go to school with, until you have inductive charging on streets, this is all early adopter stuff.
Inductive charging. Interesting that you should bring that up, because that Rolls Royce that is electric that no one's going to buy has inductive charging. So
people will buy it. There's a dozen bespoke people who will buy it, and they will be in press releases. Richard Branson will probably buy one, and.
I mean, but doesn't that inductive? You lose something crazy like 60-something% of the.
Sure.
Charge on inductive right now.
Yeah, but down the road, I think they're going to lose less. And personally, what I think is going to happen. I think that there's ultimately going to be companies that contract with cities and suburbs to tear up streets to put in inductive charging infrastructures for these new vehicles. And I don't know how long that's going to be before that happens, but that's
let's just go for the flying cars. I mean,
so until they're perpetual motion, they don't work. Is what you're suggesting.
Perpetual motion. Well, today we have perpetual motion with gasoline vehicles, right?
Well, that's my point. So it's not enough to pull over and do a fast charge. You actually want to, until you can charge while you're driving and never have to stop, ergo perpetual motion.
No.
EVs are not ready for prime time.
I'm not saying that the interstate highway system doesn't have to perpetually charge the vehicles. But I think there has to be parking lots and homes and in street side places that can charge EVs on an inductive basis.
And that's starting to happen.
Maybe I'm not understanding why it has to be inductive.
Because nobody's going to plug in.
Why is that?
Because
we plug into gas pumps all the time.
Yeah, you plug in a gas pump for 10 minutes.
And it's the same exact motion for plugging and unplugging a gas pump as it is for plugging in a car.
Do the math. Do the electrical engineering math. 10 minutes to charge.
Hi, Christian.
Hi there. How are you?
Tell me what it would
Christian
take.
From Roundel Table blog. He's our BMW expert.
Anyway, yes, that's me.
Tell me what kind of math you would take from an electrical engineering perspective to plug in and charge a battery in 10 minutes, other than better places replace the battery strategy.
Supercapacitors will facilitate that.
Okay.
Right, which are already in development, and obviously are not on the road yet, but they're coming. Here's the thing, though. Your point is...
They're what? They're on my digital watch right now. They're not in a car.
No, they're being developed. They're already being tested in cars, so it's not a theoretical thing. They're actually physical objects in testing. But here's the thing that I was hearing you saying. Inductive is necessary over plugging because people are too lazy to plug it in. But the thing is, we're already in the habit of doing that when our vehicle needs fuel.
Mm-hmm. And we're already in the habit of doing it with other devices.
Right. It's not an unnatural feeling for somebody to take a cord or whatever and plug it into a device that needs power or fuel or whatever. So to just simply extend that to a vehicle, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's a huge, big hassle. It's not like you have to, dismantle half the car to plug it in. You just grab a cord and you stick it into an outlet like you would with any other device or with your car now with a gas pump.
You do that. I do that. My friends do that, but my parents don't do that. My parents call me and say,
Your parents don't fuel their car?
Roger, I don't know how to break this to you, but our
10
parents
minutes
are
at a
going to
time.
die.
What's that?
I don't know how to break this to you, but our parents are going to die.
They are.
And we're next.
But your issue is that people aren't going to do it. So you're saying that it's the actual
they're going to do it if they have to do it.
If
they're forced to do it, they will do it. But at the same time, I think that there's better solutions that aren't going to require people to treat their cars like their iPhone.
Your parents have cell phones?
Here's the thing, though. Bear in mind.
My parents have cell phones that last for 4 weeks at a time.
Right, and as somebody just mentioned, all of our parents are going to die, and grandparents are going to die. But here's the thing. Cars are more and more becoming like iPhones. Think about it. They're much more technical in what's inside. The Ford Sync and iDrive and all this kind of stuff. That's as the younger car buyer comes into the market, people want to see more of these features, and they're more in the mindset of my iPhone is the commodity rather than my car. So while all of us who love cars and want to think about the good old days when people were, working on their big block Chevys, in the garage out back, the fact of the matter is that's not what it is nowadays. And to further extend that, I don't think that it's such a hassle for people to plug in a car because the actual time that they're interacting with the charging process is the same amount of time that they would spend pumping gas. They stick in the nozzle, they squeeze the handle, they flip down the little lever, and the pump does the rest until it's done, and they pull it out and put it back on the pump. But
it's actually less.
Well, how far away are we from the ability to charge an EV to full in 10 minutes?
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.com. Exactly.
No, it will, but it doesn't happen anytime soon.
It doesn't need to. It doesn't need to. Not at all.
As long as it has a gas engine, a range extender, or a strong hybrid, of course it doesn't need to.
No, as long as you have a reasonable amount of range to cover your daily driving and you're full when you leave in the morning, then, whatever public charging you get is gravy. But you're not dependent on it every day.
Right now, I can get on my Harley Davidson and drive to L.A. and stop probably 5 times to get to L.A. whenever I want to stop.
All right,
now let's
talk about practicality here. Come on.
No, it's not.
What we're talking about
has nothing to do with that. I have a guy who works for me who drove from Wilmington, South Carolina to L.A. in 27 hours. It happens. People do.
And how many times a year do you need to do that?
Right.
It's completely impractical, and it's.
Then why do people buy guns? You're really political here, but why do people buy guns? They don't need them. They buy them because they feel they may need them at some point in their life.
Right, and the vast majority of people either don't feel they need to own a gun, or they buy a 9mm and put it in the drawer or in the safe just in case. But the reality is, most people don't need the extreme case. Most people, can get by on 50, 60 miles a day, and their electric vehicle, even now, is going to support that.
Well, let's not forget that a lot of these households have a second car and would take that on the trip, or they'd fly, or they'd rent, or whatever. This is not a scenario where you buy one vehicle and you can never, ever drive anything but that one vehicle.
It's behavior change. You're talking about behavior change is what you're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
No,
it's tough. It's tough.
For some people, yes. For some people, it's not a behavior change. For a lot of people who are standard commuters...
I wouldn't say a lot of people. I'd say a few people it's not behavior change.
We can debate the number if you want. I'll guarantee you it's more people than cars are being made today. And will be made in the next couple of years.
Show me your data, and I will gladly acquiesce to your...
Oh, there's plug-in cars, not all cars, plug-in cars. There's more demand than supply of plug-in cars, absolutely today, and at least for the next couple years.
You can build what, 15 of them at a time, like General Motors can. I mean, come on.
Get off GM. This isn't about GM. We're talking.
GM's the only one building the only OEM building a production plug-in right now.
No, Nissan's in production with the Leaf. Tesla's in production.
No, it's not a plug-in. That's a pure EV play. It's a whole completely different story.
I thought Prius had a plug-in hybrid available.
Not yet. They're hanging out with that.
There's only one production plug-in hybrid, and that's the Leaf.
That's true, but I don't know that it's a separate conversation for plug-in hybrids and EVs.
So just because there's one, that means that they don't work, or what's
By the way, I might just actually be working on a pure EV program very soon, not through my current employer though. So just, I guess I'm a naysayer. I should.
Then you're gonna have to put your foot in your mouth, Roger. No. Is your tune gonna change and the marketing people start working on you as a new company?
No, I don't know about that. But
I can't wait to hear where you land.
My foot's too big. It won't fit in my mouth. No, my mouth's too big. It's probably, I don't know, works both ways. But at the same time, to add a little brevity to it, I don't know. I think the technology has to get a little further before EVs or plug-ins are going to be something. I think if you get to a point where you can plug in an EV, like you can plug in a cell phone and have a reasonable expectation you can go a couple days without plugging it in, then I think it'll be fine. But a couple
in
days,
many cases, people can do that.
Is the issue. It's not a couple days. It's one day, barely.
No, but here's the thing. Think about this, first of all. It's going to get there. The technology is already being developed, and in some cases is pretty close to production. So let's bear that in mind. It's going to happen. That's already taken care of. Now think about the evolution of the automobile from where it started to where it is today. Consider how long it took for us to get from, the ancient engines that were just proving the concept of internal combustion and the one-wheel drive buggies to cars that can do 250 miles an hour and, can get 60 miles to the gallon on, a gallon of diesel, and all these kinds of amazing things and advances that have happened in the automotive sector with conventional technology, and that's taken over 100 years to get there. So just the fact that these cars have been on the market for 5, maybe 10 years and in any sort of reasonable capacity doesn't mean that we're ready to write them off. And we shouldn't be.
No, understand. Understand.
Right, and at the same time, how many unhappy Leaf and Volt people are you hearing from? obviously they're working for somebody, and they're working for people in the numbers at which they're being built. There's waiting lists for them. So they're not building them hundreds and thousands at a time.
Yeah, they're digital jewelry like at this point. I mean, come on, let's be honest. They're digital jewelry at this point.
And I applaud the large manufacturers for spending the money and the investment in the future technologies to get the awareness out there and to be willing to take the risk to maybe lose some money up front to start getting people in the mindset that these are actually feasible and that there is real weight and interest behind them.
Yeah.
That's important. That's a very important.
But I agree, but they're building, basically symbols. They're not building practical vehicles at this point. I understand why you're saying that, but at the same time, if I was talking to 99% of the people who are buying a vehicle that really, really want to minimize their fuel consumption, I'm going to tell them to buy a Prius or a Fusion Hybrid. I am.
If you were talking to 99% of people in 1900 and are asking them how they were going to get around, they were going to tell you either by foot or by horse and buggy.
Yeah, but there was nobody. Yeah, right. It was. We're talking about subtle differences between automotive. We're talking about relatively subtle differences between automotive transport, because it still gets you from point B to point B.
But you also brought up the point of the infrastructure.
It is game changing. It is game changing, and you have to realize, Roger, that the person who published the story that said GM lied about the Volt is the brother of the product manager of the Leaf.
Yeah, but GM did lie about the Volt, but just about every manufacturer lies about every one of their vehicles.
Well,
so I mean, I'm not. I'm not thinking about that, but I'm just talking about the time I drove it. It was cold, I got about 26, 27 miles per gallon with it on the range extender, which is worse than a Prius or a Fusion Hybrid at the same use case.
I don't know.
It still comes down to if you think you're going to be
the Priuses driven around me on my commute, the Priuses that are driving.
You're not in cold weather. That's the difference.
So again, you know what? It does get in the 40s and 50s here. And you know what? If I look at Priuses that are driving 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour down the fast lane of the 405, they're not making their numbers, are they?
The last Leaf I saw was doing 90 in the left lane here on 94. So, awesome. I mean, the reality is that's how people drive them. Let's be realistic. They're not going to hypermile the mainstream person will not hypermile these vehicles. They're not going to drive.
And hypermiling isn't safe.
They don't have to hypermile them, and comparatively they'll get better mileage. But
if you drive 90 in a Leaf, how many miles will you get out of the Leaf if you drive 90? You're going to get like 25 miles, 30 miles, maybe.
No, you're going to get more than that, but you're certainly not going to get the 100 miles they promise. But you won't get ideal mileage in any other vehicle either, and you won't get 60 miles a gallon in cold weather that you're complaining about in a Prius either. None of those are optimal conditions for any vehicle.
I can buy gas. That's the difference. I can stop and buy
your main
gas.
argument is the infrastructure issue, which obviously is going to take time. There's no such thing as an overnight infrastructure development, especially in a country as large as the United States. It's just not going to happen.
I cannot tell you when my parking space in my apartment in Chicago is going to have a place to plug in 110, let alone 220 or 440.
Which means a plug-in vehicle may never be useful for you. That doesn't mean it's not useful
for other people. I live among 3 million people with the same situation.
And none of them have a plug?
You have to realize something here. You're living between Detroit and Chicago.
Yes.
And you're living in an urban situation and a suburban situation. Yes. You're actually an exception to the rule. Your fiance, girlfriend, whatever, is in Chicago. Your work life and work week is in Detroit. You're challenging cars at a different level than most of America would. Sorry,
give you an example
to get personal, but that's true.
And I live where I live. I'm outside the D.C. area, so I'm actually along Chesapeake Bay, and I'm in very much a suburban area where pretty much everybody lives in a townhouse or a standalone home.
Like Annapolis or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So pretty much most of the people around here either live in a standalone house or a townhouse, but regardless, they have a parking space that has easy access to power. Any of those people could easily have a car plugged in at their house. When they get home, they plug it in. The next morning, they remove the cord, and they're good to go to drive.
And they can get to D.C. and back on the envelope of a
have you ridden D.C. traffic? The regenerative braking alone will get them there and back.
I have. The only downside is that if it's really hot, they're going to run the power to generate the climate control.
But the point is, that use case is going to work. Now, also bear in mind,
well, Annapolis is kind of a stretch. Annapolis is a stretch. I would say like Chevy Chase, absolutely.
Yeah, fine, but what I'm saying is pretty much as soon as you get outside of downtown D.C. or at least outside of the Beltway, you're looking at most people living in a situation where they could plug in their vehicle and use it feasibly. Also bear in mind, a good portion of the people who live around here don't work in D.C. The population around here is many millions of people, and you don't have most of them commuting to D.C. A lot of them are commuting to areas outside of D.C., which means that they're not going in as far, and a lot of them don't have to sit in that traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't work for them. Again, for a lot of people, that would be very feasible.
But the fact that there's actually a concern about it for the mainstream conservative buyer is going to slow the adoption.
I think we've already agreed these are not yet mainstream vehicles. But you can have the 99% because the 1% that EVs get is 10 times more than all the plug-in cars of both plug-in hybrids and EVs that will be built next year. Mm-hmm. We have so far to go before we get to the people you're worried about.
And they can buy strong hybrids.
And they can. Some people will.
100 years ago, when most people were going to be looking at kitchen posts, and they weren't worried about parking spaces and gas pumps because most people couldn't afford one of these cars, and it didn't make sense for them to own one because there wasn't the infrastructure. And now look where we are.
Roger's looking at buying a vintage Corvette right now.
Okay. Or a Mustang. Or a Mustang.
He's obviously not in the situation that most of working America commuter is looking, right? Because he has the Focus Titanium. He's happy with that, and he wants to give up the Harley for his fun thing.
And I have a Fiesta. I also have a Fiesta if I want to push it a little further.
I thought your daughter was driving the Fiesta.
Yeah, but I have it. I can tell my daughter to walk or ride a bicycle.
Yeah, try that with a teenager.
No, she's 20. She has to live with it. I don't care. I just close my ears off.
Gosh. Well, Christian, you know what? I want to ask you about the 3-cylinder thing. We talked a little bit about this before. I know you were recording your podcast earlier, but we were talking about the new 3-cylinder idea. Do you think that's something that BMW would ever go with?
They're already working on that.
Like everybody's going that way.
They are developing, and they actually have already developed a 1.5 liter. They're doing it. The first one they did was a 1.5 liter twin turbo diesel, and that was the one that they put in the Vision Efficient Dynamics concept. And they are also developing a 1.5 liter twin turbo gas engine, 3 liter. And so they are doing that, and we're more than likely going to be seeing that in something like a 0 Series, which don't even get me started on that. But the smaller...
It's like bad branding, isn't it? Just 0. I'm 0.
Isn't Fiat doing a twin? Isn't Fiat doing a twin right now?
Yeah, are they?
That's where I read that Fiat's doing a twin.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting. Now, the only experience that I've had with a 3-cylinder engine is the Smart 4.2. So I can't, in any reasonable capacity,
your husband drives a Smart, right?
Yeah, in fact, half the employees of the Tesla store in LA drive smart cars. It's really rather funny.
Chelsea, I have to tell you, when I've driven the Smart 4.2, I can't get out of it fast enough. It makes me want to cry. The transmission drives me insane.
Oh, the automatic transmission drives everybody insane.
No, I was in a manual, and it drove me insane.
No, the transmission ain't pretty, and everybody knows it.
Yeah, and so that's the issue that I have, or rather, that's the only experience I have with a 3-cylinder. So I don't think it's fair for me or probably anybody else who, because I don't really know of many other production 3-cylinder engines out there right now. But I don't think that we're really at a point where we can accurately judge the value of a 3-cylinder engine in everyday life. But it's certainly a very interesting progression towards a more fuel-efficient system for people who aren't as concerned with higher performance available in their cars. I mean, which is a large majority of the population. They just want a car that is reliable and gets them there. And let's be honest, logic would say that if there are fewer moving parts in the engine, there's less to go wrong, just on simple premises there. So if there's less moving There's probably less that's going to break, and there's less fuel to be burned. So it's a very interesting progression, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to pursue for pretty much any manufacturer who's trying to appeal to people who want more fuel economy.
Do you think they'll put it in a Mini Coupe?
Like the new Mini Coupe, you mean?
Yeah. That
you know what?
thing that looks like it doesn't know what it's doing on the ass end.
The Mini MR2?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think. In fact, everything what I've heard is I don't think they're going to be doing that. That's more of a performance-minded Mini. They're trying to be more performance. They already have a John Cooper Works version available, or in the works rather. They've already said that they're doing one of those. So
wouldn't it make sense to compete against Fiat with the 500 now that they're going to come out with the higher performance 500 next year?
Yeah, I mean,
both versions in the Mini
they very well may do a 3-cylinder. I haven't seen any details yet that explicitly say we are doing a 3-cylinder in that car. I think that really their Mini, in some ways, is very much a BMW product, but in other ways it's not. They kind of do other things. It's a different focus from just the small car thing. They try to I think they use Mini as the small car that's still trying to be high performance. That's their goal. So I don't think they're going to be as concerned with putting some of the 3-cylinders and other stuff like that in there. I think they're more concerned with having a car that's small but still is fuel economical because it's lighter weight, but still has some fun and some power to throw around. I mean, the John Cooper Works Mini Coupe is expected to have like 210 horsepower. So I would say that we're much more likely to see something like a 0 Series with a 3-cylinder in it, or even if they do anything with the I division doing, a hybrid or something like that, that's where we'd be seeing a 3-cylinder.
Chelsea, I'm going to ask you a question about this. So, I mean, this, of course, is not Land Rover, which has no plans of doing anything new. Do the S Coopers and all that stuff, meet all of these regulations that are going to be coming out for the manufacturers and what they're trying to make? If Mini doesn't do something that's a 3-cylinder or isn't sporty, isn't crazy fun?
Yeah, some will meet it, some won't. It'll also vary by regulation, but this is where it goes back to the whole notion of averaging and how some of them will make up for others.
Yeah, I was kind of amazed, actually. I went and just consumer-wise drove the Countryman recently and was like, wait, why does the S get better gas mileage?
Well, that's like the old Saturn Sky and the Pontiac Solstice that got better gas mileage as a 260 horsepower turbocharged over the 2.4 liter naturally aspirated engine.
Is that Alex?
Yeah, I jumped on.
Oh, yay, y'all. It's Alex from GM Inside News.
Hey, what's up, Alex?
Thanks for calling in.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what turbocharging and direct injection can do. I'm listening to a lot of the 3-cylinder stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of funny, right? I guess we talked earlier in the show before the podcast about how most people don't know what they're driving, but I think people do look at those numbers on the sticker, right? The Moroni. They're going to look at what their gas savings are, what the EPA rating is. They're not going to look at whatever if it's a 3, 4, 6 or turbo or whatever.
I would say that there are certain
more likely to notice turbo so they can say, "Oh, I have a turbo."
Right.
But I think it's depending on what part of the country you're into. Last night on Twitter, a lot of people were going back and forth about pickup trucks, and Barry Lohman said something to the effect that if mid-sized pickup trucks in Texas are useless, it's you might as well drive like a minivan. You got to drive a full-size truck. You got to drive a big truck. The bigger, the better. I think it would depend on what part of the nation you are. I mean, some people, I would say maybe the West Coast, where a 3-cylinder turbo might be almost an image thing, where in Texas people will just laugh you right off the road.
Well, and I think that there are certain elements of, most people at least have a general sense, I don't want a V8 daily driver and stuff like that. That they at least understand that there's a better chance that if they have fewer cylinders, they're probably going to burn less gas. Just as a general rule. Then I hear a lot of people who aren't car people say, well, I'm getting a Civic or whatever, but I don't want the V6 model. I want the 4-cylinder because I don't want to, I don't need as much power. I just want the fuel economy and those kinds of things. That I don't think that they'll be too concerned with. Oh, well, I've got a 3-cylinder turbo. Aside from, as you said, Michelle, being able to say, oh, I've got a turbo in my car. It's obviously faster. But I think that there are certain elements that everybody's going to at least wrap around their heads that 3-cylinder is probably more fuel efficient than the 4-cylinder or whatever.
Well, didn't Ford say that this is pretty much expecting to replace any type of naturally aspirated small displacement 4-cylinder? So I guess anything in the 1.6 to 1.4 range, anywhere in the Ford world, that this engine will go ahead and replace. It's kind of like, everybody's doing it. Everybody's going down.
Exactly.
Like General Motors said, the 1.4 turbo to replace the old 2.2, 2.4 EcoTech, and Ford did the twin turbo EcoBoost 3.5. It's just a matter of downsizing, add turbo and direct injection, and presto changeo. Same horsepower, better gas mileage.
No, you're right. Everybody's doing it all over the place. Everyone's, drop cylinders, add forced induction, and, sell it as the fuel-efficient second coming.
Well, given that, and we spoke earlier pre-podcast about all the OEM CEOs, that's a lot of letters, talking about raising gas prices. Wouldn't it be better just to actually focus on the engines? And given we are going to do hourly announcements in 4 minutes.
Is that little dinging?
Yeah, that's that singing we do. So, why not just focus on the technology, right?
There's still some laws of physics things you have to take into consideration, where the same things that everyone has always had to think about forever, which is, the engine is not the only component there. You have to get into the Lotus mentality of adding lightness. That the less weight you have to haul around, the less fuel you have to burn to do it. That's just like the thing with, for example, when I was shopping for for a car a couple of years ago, I was looking at getting an E46 BMW, and I was looking at the differences between a 325 and a 330 and whether it was worth getting a 330. And what I actually discovered in talking with a lot of people on the forums and other folks who'd owned the two different models, they actually were much more in favor of the 330 for a couple of reasons. One, that it actually turned out to be more fuel efficient in a lot of everyday driving situations because the engine was just enough bigger that it didn't have to work as hard to move the car around. So, just reasonable driving conditions, they actually found that they burned less gas in the 330 because the engine wasn't that much bigger. And that was one of the weight really wasn't much of a difference there. It's just the engine was slightly bigger because there was a longer stroke on it, and so people found that was actually something that was worthwhile, was getting a little bit extra engine. So really, but if to balance that out, if you had a smaller engine, you're going to want to cut weight in order to make it more efficient, because just putting a smaller engine in a car that hasn't changed in any other way and expecting it to be more fuel efficient is a losing battle, because you're asking the engine to do more with less, and it's just going to have to work harder, and where it's going to come down to coming up with that extra power is more fuel.
I think the future, you can keep tweaking engines, but I think that the real gains are going to be in lightening the cars, and it's going to be interesting how manufacturers can get cars as light as they can without raising the price on them astronomically by using more aluminum, carbon fiber, technology is becoming a little bit more cheaper to where you're seeing it in more common cars now. Like the most common car, as far as average price, I think would be the M3 Coupe with the carbon fiber roof panel.
Well, and BMW is building a whole carbon fiber factory out west, and that seems to me like that's going to become a very prominent part of their strategy for making greater fuel efficiency across the lineup, is adding carbon fiber to a lot more areas of the vehicle, especially if they have their own factory for manufacturing it to exactly what they need. So I have a feeling that that's what we're going to be seeing, especially with things like the I brand and stuff like that, just from BMW. And So and that's, I think you're right. That's going to be something we're going to be seeing a lot of manufacturers. But the big concern there is, carbon fiber costs money, and unless you really can produce it in mass numbers and get the cost of actually producing it down, it is going to throw off the cost of the vehicles. And I think that having mass production facilities for things like aluminum components and carbon fiber and these other lightweight materials that make a big difference is really where you're going to be able to see lightweight vehicles that don't break the bank.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wait, hang on just a second, Alex.
Sure.
You guys, if you have just joined us, it is the top of the hour on Open Line. Thank you very much to Autoline Detroit for hosting us. And if you want to join in, call in, you can go to http://bit.ly/openline, and you'll find the call-in numbers there. So you can talk to Chelsea Sexton and myself, Michelle Naranjo. And, Chelsea, it's kind of interesting that they're talking about lightweight, and I know you have like a little bit of an inside line inside your house on Tesla and the lightweight decisions that Tesla's made. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I don't know that I have that much of an inside line on the material side. I mean, Tesla's known for
there's a reason they chose Lotus, right? They didn't choose a Chrysler 300.
Right.
No. So, look, they definitely started with a fairly small chassis vehicle. They sort of lengthened it and stiffened it and did different things, and then reskinned it in carbon fiber, which is the reason that thing's $100,000.
Right.
So,
wasn't carbon fiber supposed to be getting like huge government involvement, like in the Bush years? Like, what's happened with that? Do you know?
I don't know. I know that it hasn't gotten a huge amount of government support, but there is more interest, not specific to carbon fiber, but the discussion's absolutely right on in terms of interest in lightweighting materials and whether or not you're talking about an alt-fuel vehicle to begin with, but any vehicle. And guys like Amory Levins at Rocky Mountain Institute have been arguing for this for years and years on any kind of vehicle, and that's why we're seeing more aluminum, also for environmental reasons, particularly out of Jaguar and Land Rover and some of those guys over in the UK. But I think we're just starting to evolve into a materials-based discussion when it comes to not only investment.
It's all carbon, right? It's all carbon. There's a limited amount of carbon on the Earth.
Right.
Christian, you're the scientist. You'll tell me if I'm wrong.
I'm not a scientist. You're the wrong person. You're asking the wrong person about that.
Yeah. Well, you're more likely to know than me. We'll put it that way. So there's a limited amount of carbon on the planet. We have limited materials that we can work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. There is no such thing as an infinite raw material. I mean, there just isn't. Because we're not talking about energy here. That's a different issue. But the actual physical materials that you use to manufacture components for the vehicles, it has to come from somewhere, and there's only so much physical material on the Earth. But carbon fiber and these other lightweight technologies, carbon fiber is the best known one out there right now. I mean, that's the one that currently offers the best blend of strength and durability, whatever your opinions are on that, combined with the lightweight aspect. I mean, that's really the best known one and probably the best technology we have currently. But as per our discussion earlier about electric vehicles and infrastructure build out and all this kind of stuff, if more emphasis and interest is put into these things for mass production and mainstream use, the research and development money and subsequent results will follow. So, they'll find other things that are usable and can match or exceed carbon fiber's combination of usability and strength and lightweight aspects, and evolve beyond it.
Well, I guess that's really going to be the next step is finding an affordable way of lighting these cars, and I think not a lot of people it doesn't seem like a lot of manufacturers are putting a lot of attention. I think the engines are always the big thing. It's always in consumers' minds, engines are the big item to worry about.
Right.
Like, oh, what are the engines doing? What are the engines doing? It's like, everyone says, the Corvette should get a twin turbo V6 because it consumes a lot of gas. It's like, well, I know a lot of Corvette guys that claim to get about 30 miles per gallon on the highway, and that's not bad for a car that gets makes 430 plus horsepower.
Right, but it's all made of plastic, so.
Made of plastic, and and you look at the Z06, an aluminum frame, magnesium, engine cradle, carbon fiber body panels. So I mean that's a common, lightening the car is really where the work needs to be done. But I think the engines are just kind of like, we can make, now they can make smaller engines just as powerful as the next, like we talked about before, the next level up. But, if you keep building these bigger and bigger cars, and the cars seem to be getting bigger and bigger every generation, I don't know of anybody that has exactly gone down or stayed even or gone down a significant amount of weight from one generation to the next. Every car seems to get bigger.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. It's like, well, we have more efficient engines, by the way. Like, that's great, but the Camaro is almost 4,000 pounds.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, I'm more familiar with BMW than any other lineup, but just look at the 3 Series alone, from what it was in the original 3 Series with the E21 up through the E30, which is the one that most people are familiar with, all the way up to what we currently have with the E99. They're almost not even the same car. They're the 3 Series now is bigger than what the 5 Series used to be back in the day. So, and you see it with everybody. Everybody's doing that. Cars get bigger and bigger and bigger and more features and more safety stuff and all this kind of stuff thrown in there, and suddenly the car is huge.
Yeah, because it seems every generation it goes up, and everyone's like, they're making, and they're like, people are making small cars again. Like, no, they were making small cars. Those small cars grew up and they got big, so they needed something to replace it. Like the Fiesta is the size of, I got to say, or about the same size of what an Escort used to be, maybe a little bit bigger than that. But an Escort was, they had the whatchamacallit, what was the Spire, and then they had something else before as their compact car.
Fiero?
No, Fiero's Pontiac.
No, you're right. The Festiva.
Yeah, Festiva, that's right. I always want to say Fiesta again. But, so they always had, it's a smaller car, but it just slowly moves up. Slowly everybody moves up. And, it's like watching a kid grow up, And they're like,
I missed the Justy. What happened to the Justy?
The Justy. it grew up, but it didn't go
drive.
Of course it came in 4-wheel drive. But, it got big. It got heavy. Like we would say, people draw comparisons. Like everyone says, Camaro got so big and got so heavy. Being a GM guy, that's the car everybody likes to pick their, set their targets on. I'm like, well, if you actually look at it, and to bring BMW in, if you look at the M3, which is if you look at equipment list, 400 plus horsepower V8, it's an M3 is like what 30. A coupe is 3,700 pounds, around that area. And the Camaro is a little under 3,900. So there's about a 200-pound difference between the two cars, but an M3 is a significantly smaller vehicle than a Camaro. It doesn't have giant bling-blow 20-inch wheels and a chassis built in Australia to handle, kangaroo joltings.
Right.
But it's a tank of a platform. So I'm like, yeah, it's heavy, but I think it's heavy. The reason a lot of people complain is its chassis dynamics are off because it's a sedan that's the coupe that was built on a sedan platform, so it's supposed to drive like a performance sedan, but now you have this low-slung coupe and it doesn't feel as well as the custom-made Ford Mustang platform. But as I rant and ramble, but yeah, it's getting so great.
You're actually bringing up something that I want to talk about, which I'm going to change topics a little bit. You're talking about mixing up platforms. So here's one of my pet peeves right now. So we have, Volvo and Mazda and Saab and I don't know who else that are they're like the off-brand, right? Like you're gonna find them at the upper end scale of the TJ Maxx, like clear out section.
No, they're not the first tier guys.
Right.
You should know you have one.
And they're built on these platforms platforms that are like completely ridiculous. Like I'm looking at at cars right now. Like I am. I'm looking for a daily commuter. I started looking at C30s. Why the heck would I get a C30 that gets like horrible gas mileage because it's based on the old school Focus? Like what's really going to happen with Saab? What's, you know, I mean, all of these manufacturers that kind of got sold off a little bit.
Talk tomorrow.
Like, how soon can they actually start meeting what people are going to be asking for and expecting, right?
Yeah. I'm surprised that Geely didn't get into some sort of co-op with Ford to start sharing some of their global platforms. I don't know. Ford was just like, no, it's all yours now. You handle your own chassis thing. But like Saab, I don't know what the hell's going on with Saab. I stopped paying attention after the third company didn't buy them. It's frustrating to watch it. It's just
I know. Did anybody on the phone go to the Saab event in D.C., the 9/4? Because apparently the Spiker guy came and like was really revealing and said, like, he just laid it out for everybody and was really, really honest about everything. Still doesn't give me a lot of hope. I mean, it's very strange how all this is working. They're all still working off of these old platforms.
Yeah, they're all working on hand-me-downs at this point. I mean, I don't know. The S6, what is the S60? Is that something that Volvo engineered, or is that something built up? Is that a Ford global platform? Because it seems to do pretty well. A lot of people seem to like driving it.
I think that's an old Ford. I mean, it's beautiful. I've driven it. It's amazing, and it's very much Volvo fit and finish, you know.
Right.
But I don't know that, you know, we still have yet to see if they can carry that forward. I mean, they're supposedly gonna, you know, there's been some PR announcements in the last year that have said they're going to come out with like a C30 electric that was going to lease at like $1,500 a month.
Wow, what a bargain!
Yeah, something ridiculous.
Yeah, although that's more a emerging, disturbing trend of automakers who are doing EV pilots. BMW started with it, and Volvo's just picking up that baton.
You're absolutely right, because when I talked to a Volvo representative, I said, like, what's going on there? And they said, well, that's just one Chinese manufacturer that said they could do it for us, and, you know, we didn't mean for that press release to come out. And, you know, it's kind of not like what Audi's doing, which Audi's actually invested in the technology.
Mm-hmm. So far, I mean, we'll see. But they also went to the source, too, and they decided they wanted to get in. They went and hired Martin Eberhard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, though. A lot of the companies that we're talking about are companies that are in transition phases. I mean, Saab obviously is in transition. Volvo's in transition. These are companies that, you know, they're not established like some of these other manufacturers, like, you know, Ford or BMW. These other companies that are developing platforms for vehicles. So their focus is kind of more about getting back on their feet and getting back on a track versus, you know, specific product items. Now, I would argue that developing the really quality products are key to getting back on track. But, you know, then again, I think we're all looking at it from, you know, as usually seems to be the case, the perspective of the auto enthusiasts, the auto journalists, the people who are, you know, neck deep in the industry and know all these technical things, whereas the consumer is just going to say, it just doesn't feel the same. But they don't know why. And I think that's really the responsibility of the auto manufacturers to pick up the baton and run with it as, you know, developing the car and the platform for that vehicle. You know, but again, that costs a lot of money. You know, developing a whole new chassis and testing it and getting all the safety checks. I mean, that's really expensive. So if you're talking about a company that's already kind of, you know, unsure of itself at the time, if they can find a place to save some money, and make a car that's, good enough or pretty good and sell a decent number of them, that's going to be very appealing. So I think that's probably what we're seeing.
It's very strange, right? Because, of course, there is the big three, and then there was our Honda, Toyota, Nissan, and then we had our boutique companies. And then we have our new boutique companies, Tesla, Aptera. I'm not sure what happened to them, Chelsea.
Yeah, I wouldn't want them together at all.
Fisker, so like all of those boutique companies of the past have now sort of like they're struggling to not like lose ground to be in that sort of startup world, but they're ending up in the startup world, right? They're looking for funding from anybody that can fund them. Spiker was certainly part of that, and they, ended up selling themselves just so that they could believe in their own little boutique sub-brand that they bought. It's going to be really interesting to me to see what happens with them in terms of their ability to sort of keep up, or if that brings out the smarter, the better, the best, where they're, I'd love to see that. I think most people would love to see that, but
yeah, but here's the thing. This is not unique to the auto industry either. Look at any major industry with global reach, and what you have is a hierarchy of the new companies that come with fresh ideas, and they're really exciting, and they get a whole lot of buzz around them, and you get all these venture capitalists that throw a whole bunch of money at them, and they got cash in the bank, and they can run around and test all these new things and come up with these new products and all this exciting stuff, and everyone's really excited and all this kind of stuff, and that's what you see. With the new companies that come up. And that's what happened with Tesla a few years ago. And they said, we're going to build these cars that are really lightweight. And they've got these amazing new battery packs and all this kind of stuff. And everyone went, wow, it's amazing. And they got all this money. And now, not really sure, because then what happens is the companies kind of fall back out of the public eye and out of the industry eye. And you get somebody else who comes up behind them and then has an even newer idea and all this kind of stuff. And they get the money. And the company that used to be really exciting kind of falls off a little bit, and they're not getting the same funding because people aren't seeing the results as quickly, and they start to doubt it and all this kind of stuff, and then you get that whole process. And some of them make it and become the big companies, the Fords and the BMWs and all these guys, and they're the ones that succeed.
Very true.
But a whole bunch of them end up just kind of collapsing because either their management wasn't able to successfully put out the product, or they didn't have the engineering behind their claims, or they just couldn't get the money because the product wasn't coming out fast enough, because let's be honest, the modern world demands fast results. And so, if you're a company that is in the position of, we used to be really hot and now we're kind of fighting to get back to that point and be big and get the money, and we're losing investment and all this kind of stuff, what are you going to do? Are you going to spend half your money on just building a chassis, or are you going to spend it on, which, let's be honest, chassis are not an exciting part to investors. What's exciting are the new technologies that makes your company interesting to potential other investors, or being able to license the technology so that even if you don't have a specific product with your badge on it, you're able to sell that technology to somebody else who can use it, and you're still making money. That's where the companies who are getting pressured by investors or just want to see some money come in, they're going to be much more focused on the new technology that gives them an edge that they can patent and all this kind of stuff than just simply the underpinnings of the product that rolls out the assembly line with their badge on the hood. That's the reality of business.
Yeah, I think you're right to a certain extent, and I know Chelsea and I both have our share of California startup businesses under our belt. And here's what I know, and Chelsea, chime in at any point, but a new manufacturer is actually looking to get bought up. I don't think that...
Not always.
Partnership with Toyota was, it's not the dream come true yet, but
no,
that
but that was a licensing
ideal
deal.
if Toyota hadn't had the problems that they had. And I think Fisker has like a very sweet relationship with GM. Am I right, Chelsea?
I don't know. I think right now Fisker has naked pictures of somebody, because that's the only thing that explains the little substances they have shown.
They are the most sizzled.
They have something. Yeah, they have something on GM that they know they made, something.
I don't know if it's on GM. It's probably on some politician or DOE guy at this point, because what I'm seeing has really very little to do with GM.
Well,
really?
but let's go back for a second though about the mentioning of Tesla. I mean, and their deal with Toyota. All of that resulted from the fact that Tesla needed money. You know, that they were not as exciting, that they weren't making the money because, let's face it, the cars are $110,000 or whatever. And, you know, Tom Hanks is the only kind of people.
Divorce.
Right. And yeah, exactly. Yeah. Elon Musk, his whole thing is on the rocks, which means that he's not as, you know, directly involved in it. And also, remember, he comes out of the Silicon Valley tech world, you know, PayPal and all that kind of stuff. He's used to these companies developing a product, putting it out quickly, getting a huge buzz, you know, getting huge valuations, and then either selling or going public or you know, whatever. And the reality is the auto industry just can't move as fast as that because, you know, you're talking about an entirely different structure. And, you know, so obviously Tesla needed money badly. So what did they do? They took their technology, the one thing that they really had that nobody else did, which was these battery packs that made them the hot thing to begin with, and they made a deal to get a huge infusal of cash from Toyota to license that to a big manufacturer. Mm-hmm. So it's that cycle.
Yeah, but the thing about it is, you're amplifying on what you're saying is that what's different between tech and autos is that tech doesn't require necessarily the capital investment that autos do. You can have a fabless semiconductor or some Chinese manufacturer make what you want to make, and you could do all the IP here on the U.S. side. But in an auto company, it's not like that. You have to have people in North America actually building things, and it costs a lot of money. And Toyota had that money, and that's why they went there. It's that simple. It's real. You
also, when you talk about the auto industry, you're talking about government approval on things and R&D for physical objects that, you know, again, and you're right, it does come back to a lot more money because it's physical items versus, in a lot of cases, virtual ones. But, you know,
large ones with liability. That's the difference.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not as fast moving because there's a lot more, you know, to get through for any product you're developing. And, you know, the chassis is a huge component of that, and you know, the platform for the vehicle is a big expense. So if you're
all that stuff, I mean, you got to crash a dozen vehicles still, even though most of them are built virtually. I mean, that's insane.
Oh yeah, the expense for R&D is more than most tech companies are ever going to shell out ever. For
new vehicle program, the number that the industry uses for a new vehicle program is like $3 to $4 billion, a whole new platform, and then a motor, just an engine, is $1 billion.
Right, exactly. So you're talking about numbers that you know, serial entrepreneurs and, you know, venture capitalists in other areas can't really wrap their heads around because they don't ever have to deal with that. So at the same time, though, when you're looking at auto startups, I mean, you know,
that's oxymoronic saying
it's a bizarre idea. I mean,
terrible idea. If you're successful in the auto business, you're making 5% on your capital. That's like a sucker's game, a complete sucker's game.
So to me, it seems much more logical that what we're going to start seeing is a lot of these companies that are trying to develop full-on vehicles, because, you know, let's be honest, vehicles are the sexy part of the auto industry. It's not the you know, the Bosch products or the, you know.
They're also the lowest margin.
Right, but for a startup to come out, I mean, they're the appealing part to the public, generating buzz. But, you know, where I think we're going to start seeing it in a lot of cases with these new technologies that are being developed, especially with electric cars and all that, it's probably going to be a lot more driven by a lot of the same old big manufacturers who are going to be licensing technologies from small startups that are coming up with interesting engineering things.
Not even small ones. I mean, look at Microsoft and Apple with Ford and the iPod. Apple hasn't licensed the iPod to an OEM, but I think that's probably going to be a huge deal if they ever do that.
Yeah, but still, we're talking about big companies.
There's going to be an Apple automotive user interface at some point. Just a question of how soon they monetize it, is my opinion.
Yeah,
I mean, you could partner with.
Would hesitate to agree with you there, but.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of $1 billion at stake if they were to license their technology to something.
Well, but here's the thing, and this is kind of going off on a tangent, but bear in mind, Apple is a hardware company. They're not a software company, so they build software purely to operate their hardware. And where they make their money is on hardware. So they're not. And let's be honest, they're the richest tech company in the world. I don't think that they're really in need of a license deal.
No, but I think that iOS on an automotive platform would be amazing. I think
it'd be fantastic, but it's not. I don't think it's going to happen. At least not as long as Steve Jobs is around.
You answered that question yourself just now.
But it's just not going to happen. I
don't know. I think it's good because they're being focused, but at the same time, I think if somebody else can come up with a integrated, modular, and reliable, that's the problem. Is that everything has been, been a JD Power quality nightmare, which we're just about to see unfold on all these telematics systems, in my opinion. But I think that an Apple type experience would be, or whoever can do it, like an integrated, simple experience for this advanced technology. We don't have it right now. And that includes the EV space and all that other stuff. And I think it's a key enabler to EVs ever taking off is that they have to solve this user interface software problem and then also the plug problem. Both of those.
And see, that's where I think we're going to start seeing an auto startup is not going to be an auto manufacturer. It's going to be an auto supplier, and it's going to be somebody who comes up with a really interesting, solution to a technical problem, and they're going to be able to license that or sell the actual product to big OEMs. But I don't. To me, it seems like there's such a financial hurdle to actually putting out a production vehicle for these companies that it seems highly unlikely that we're going to see many, if any, of these auto manufacturer startups really succeed.
Yeah,
I don't know how they're going to sell this stuff. I don't know how they sell it. Yeah, go ahead.
What were you saying, Kelsey?
Well, let me quickly clarify. The plug problem has basically been solved. All of the plug-in vehicles use one plug except for the Roadster, which came before the Standard. So let's get over that. I would completely agree, though, that we're not going to see any new startup automotive companies, most likely. And depending on how you define successful, Tesla may or may not be the one that snuck through, and that remains to be seen with Model S. But part of it, too, follows the venture interest quite a bit. 4 or 5 years ago, it was everybody wanted to tick the box on having a transport deal. So we had, two main ones and a few others all tick their box with Tesla and Fisker and Think and so on. It has very much evolved to the component level and a little dance with materials, but we're not quite there yet. So the companies that we see emerge will absolutely correlate with where we're seeing the investment go, especially since government investing is following on so closely to what the VCs want.
What are the national labs doing at the moment? I was following them a couple of years ago. They were doing batteries. What are they doing right now?
They're still primarily doing batteries. None of those guys have really evolved publicly into the material space. It still is all about the batteries. Both improving primarily energy density and cost. There's two lines of thinking right now in the how do we improve the product world. One is how do we get really long range, and the other direction is how do we keep it 100, 150 miles to drive the cost down. And there's sort of room for both, but most companies are pursuing one or the other, and so everybody working on batteries is working accordingly with those two goals in mind.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear because I heard that Oak Ridge and Argonne were doing a lot of work in this space. And is it value add? Is it really helping the industry? You think?
It does help the industry from a vetting perspective because the whole liars, damn liars, and battery company, idiom is there for a reason. And so it helps credibility. It helps, a lot of the actual research and new ideas that we're seeing are coming out of the universities. That's something that really since MIT and A123 has been driven that way. Where, previous to that, no one really took anything that came out of the university to be all that serious or scalable. So now we're seeing Amprius out of Stanford and a few other things that are following on, and the labs are doing a lot of the vetting as much as they're doing any R&D.
So we're talking about stuff that 10 to 15 year out technologies are being vetted right now by the national labs.
That as well as, how do we keep the 7% a year or so improvement on lithium going, and what are the, there's so many
the basic chemistry, the chemistry problem, yeah.
And do we, pursue other things lithium related, given all the different anode and cathode match potential? Obviously it was cobalt, and then it was phosphate and some manganese, and who's going to do what going forward, and what format should it take? There's obviously an interest in standardized formatting. It's something we're probably not going to see for quite some time. It's the one proprietary thing that auto companies think about with EVs. It's not about the motors, it's about the batteries. So I think Shai is going to have to wait a while for his standardized batteries, if it ever happens.
Well, I guess in Israel they've got some cars running on it, I heard. I mean, is that true?
Yeah, but it's like hydrogen. The question isn't, can you do it?
I mean, I think
what did they show today about the battery technology? I forget, one of the higher media sites, I think I saw on Twitter, that they have some sort of battery where it's a liquid battery, it can be almost like refueled. Yeah, I mean, it
reminded me of old lead acid, water-based.
That's exactly what it sounded like. I was like, so a lead acid battery, so it has to be upright in a single position.
Don't get into a car accident.
Well,
you're going to get it over your neck.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten lots of enthusiasm today. On the surface, it sounds like a nightmare to me too. But they basically envision that they keep, the electrolyte and the material separate, and they flow it through, and that you could go to a station and refill it, kind of like you do with gas, which begs the question for me of, yay, another infrastructure problem.
Oh, an electrolyte filling station. That sounds difficult.
Yeah, and so
I guess if you really look at it, if you looked at 100 years ago, like you're going to put a metal can behind me, and you're going to fill it with a flammable liquid that's going to go to an engine that's going to be behind me in case someone hits me, it's going to sprout. So, I mean,
But here's the thing.
Yeah, but
that's about all that. About the critical thing about infrastructure that I think we need to bear in mind is the main problem for the electrical infrastructure in terms of actual delivery of power to the vehicle is the last mile issue. Yeah. Electricity's everywhere. You just have to have a standard way, which Chelsea said we already have, of connecting that outlet to your vehicle. Now, we've already discussed in the past about issues with the electrical grid, nationwide maybe not being fully up to being able to handle the power yet. But again, the vehicles aren't that prevalent yet. It's going to take time, and as to the time that it takes to get these vehicles out on the road to the capacity that it might really start to be a serious concern for the electrical companies to put out the power for them, the companies are going to be building out their electrical grids to a higher spec anyway. So it's going to evolve side by side, but we already have all of the delivery there. You just have to put in a pump, basically. Whereas if you're talking about a whole new system of a liquefied electrical power system, I mean, that's a totally different infrastructure than just connecting to an existing nationwide grid and putting a pump into your car.
Right. Yeah, and, a lot of it doesn't even require the 240 chargers. I mean,
Right.
Against the previous discussion, 110 actually works just fine for a lot of the plug-in hybrids and things. So it is a last mile
issue that's really the problem now. But everywhere else, it's covered. We already have the
right. Yeah, and so we're standardized already for everything up to 240 and on a country-by-country basis. So we use the different standards in Europe, but I don't see very many EVs driving across the Atlantic. One day it may all go to 1. But for now, we're down to 2 or 3, and that's pretty good. But at least in this country, we're all on the same one, and fast charging is still being resolved. We have a couple different standards right now for that. But overall, it's, transformer-level upgrades. It's not nationwide grid.
Right. I mean, it's the power is there. You just have to have the adapter. But the infrastructure in a macro sense is already built out.
Yeah. But, it does come down a lot to the batteries and also the battery management. And so back to the startup discussion, a lot of the sort of secret sauce and those sorts of intel pieces that are interesting to larger companies right now have to do with that. Tesla's deal with Toyota had nothing to do with their battery so much as their propulsion system. Tesla had long partnered with Panasonic a while back, so I don't expect to see 18650s in the Model S or the RAV4. Daimler took Tesla's batteries for the Smart EV a while ago. And Panasonic has since invested in Tesla. So it does come down to how do you integrate all of those things together, and that's where Tesla has succeeded. AC Propulsion is a tiny little company, mostly because they want to be, that every automaker has gone to in one year or another to help them build an EV just because they know how to do that propulsion system better. So it'll be in part about the components and in part about who's best at marrying those things together and delivering performance.
Yeah, I mean, so it seems to me like, why wouldn't we take advantage of the existing infrastructure? Why is there such a desire to totally rebuild the infrastructure when 90% of the legwork for an alternative energy system is already there? There's as we've talked about before, there's two glaring issues, which is, the range and the charge time, which is being worked on. Batteries are getting better every day, and other technologies are coming out to store the power and then deliver it as necessary and be able to hold more of it. And the actual connecting your car to the grid. And one of them is a fairly simple fix. It's just actually spending the money to put in the charging stations. But, the batteries are going to take longer. But, so too is the adoption in the public of the idea that electric vehicles are a viable alternative to their traditional gas-powered vehicles, and the actual, purchase and deployment of these vehicles. It's going to be a long process.
Right. And at the same time, people think of EVs as the same way as gas usage. You drive it till it's basically empty, you charge it till it's basically full. And that's not how EV drivers drive. Many of them start out full in the morning. Some don't. So, if you don't have a charger at home, you don't. You charge at work or whatever. But it's a matter of topping off here and there. And so this whole notion of range anxiety, or we need 300-mile battery, none of that goes to how these vehicles are actually used by the real people that have been driving them and are buying them now. Will they ultimately want longer range to reach a bigger market? Sure. But I think we spend too much on this. Batteries aren't ready yet. Even though we want them to be improved, those ideas are not mutually exclusive.
I agree with you, and I think that you're absolutely right, that for a majority of people that are potential electric vehicle owners, the current battery technology is going to be sufficient for most of their everyday use. But at the same time, there does seem to be a belief in the general public that they're not there yet, that there's not enough range. So I think that even if technically it's going to be fully suitable for most people, there's going to be range anxiety until you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that your car is going to get you, X number of miles. And it's just, so it's an unfortunate hurdle, but it's there.
Yeah, although at the same time, the only way we get past it is to start putting cars on the road. You can tell people all day long that, it'll work for you. When people see their neighbor using it and they go, oh, if it works for him, I can make it work, that's what changes minds. Mm-hmm. So it is a matter of having to start with what you have. And
it's the community college here in my county. I just went over there the other day and saw that they suddenly put in a huge solar array over one of the parking lots. Big thing. It's great because then it provides shade and it also generates a whole ton of power. And I looked into it, and apparently they are in talks with a few of the different charging station providers to put in some charging stations and make electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid vehicle only parking spots next to those charging stations, so that way someone goes into class. Class at minimum is going to be an hour long, and a lot of classes run 2 or 3 hours. So you're in there, and you got your car charging up. By the time you come back out, your car could be, if you're in a long class, as much as a third or half full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on a 240 outlet, you get about 12 to 25 miles per hour.
Well, right, what's interesting about that though is that so we have all of this conversation. I mean, you have a community college building arrays, which is awesome, but then we have Chrysler trying to introduce SRT as its own brand. And I'm going to guess that, that college class at that community college is going to be completely divided amongst the people that would be like, oh, I'm going to plug in, and the people that are going to be like, I want to burn, baby, burn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what do you guys think about that? I mean, Chrysler introducing SRT as a brand.
Can I make a comment, Ms. Michelle? This is VRM Chris about that.
Hey, Chris, welcome. It's nice to hear from you.
Thank you. This is my take on it. When you said that,
I think Chrysler right now has to work with what they've got. Despite Sergio Marchionne saying what he said about the other day about purchasing the government share in Chrysler, or the U.S. government share, the fact is they're up to their eyeballs in debt. They're only able to do what they're able to do. So SRT, it sounds great. You know, it gets some press, it gets some image, whether you think it's positive or negative, until they're able to get more economical vehicles on the road that they can sell at a reasonable price and make profit and so on and so forth. I do see that there could be a split between those who are driving EVs and those who are not. Because, as I put in earlier, driving EV is going to, right now, it will require a change in your mindset. Because people do want to be able to say, okay, I can get up and go whenever I want. I don't mean just commuting to, work and home. But if I have to go somewhere, I can get up and go. And if I have to put some more in, I have to just go to the gas station, even if it's for $4 a gallon. Put the gas in, go. Right now EVs require time to fill in with energy. What, a few hours, 3 or 4 hours? People aren't prepared to do any waiting. So with Chrysler introducing SRT, we're doing what we need to do for the time being until we can get where we need to go. But we do know that when we put this out, we can get all kinds of press, and they do. So for right now, I would say that for right now. Later on, I would say in about a couple of years, that's going to really tell it. Whether they're putting out things that are economical to own, to operate, and so on and so forth. EVs it's going to be the batteries. And as Ms. Chelsea indicated, integration of all the systems. How can we operate efficiently for what the charge we've got? How are we going to get 200 miles, for example? Because you can't have just one gear. You can't just be restricted to 40 miles an hour, if that. If you want people to adopt EVs, I wouldn't mind having an EV around where I live. It'd be great. It'd be absolutely great. But if I want to go any further, I need to have enough distance. I don't want to be restricted to 50 miles or 100 miles. I need at least 200 miles or better. So that's the real question about EVs, and that's going to take bucks to do the research. It's going to take money to have the software that can truly integrate everything, whether it's the battery, the electrical controls, or whatever. Can you sustain speed on a highway, 70 miles an hour? You can go up to it, but how far can you sustain it? If you can't sustain it for long, what's your point?
Well, and the opposite of that is how many people actually need an SRT, right?
Mhm.
Like, how marketable is that? Like, people love to. It's kind of like we were saying earlier. I don't know if you were listening, but you could drive a 3-cylinder as long as it had turbo. I would drive a turbo. Well, if it's 3-cylinder, who really cares? You can say you have a turbo. If you say you have an SRT, well, you're kind of saying gas guzzler, right?
Which is there's truth to that, but keep in mind where Chrysler is right now. Keep in mind Chrysler has been stripped for about a good 12 years before Fiat came in. Daimler did not do Chrysler any favors. They basically took the cash flow of Chrysler, put it back in Mercedes and AMG. They stripped Chrysler. Chrysler's having to start over. That's why I said Chrysler's doing what they have to do right now with what we've got.
And that comes back to the same discussion about platforms. It's
exactly.
You've only got so much money. You spend it where you can make people get excited, and you can get some cash flow back in the system.
Yes, until you can do what you really need to do. So to me, that news is not necessarily bad. It's called we've got to survive. We're not totally out. But we're not making $6-7 billion either.
But I want to put a counterpoint to that, though, which is in the current climate of economy and the mindset of more fuel efficiency and all these kinds of things, and the new image of the big three, what have you. How feasible is it to suddenly turn around and say we're going to be really putting a lot of money behind these high performance, big, powerful, more gas guzzling vehicles when we've already seen trends to the contrary in the general public towards vehicles that are, smaller.
I don't know in the general public that's the case, because there's the resistors, right? There's that.
Right. I'm just wondering, are there enough of them that this really is going to be a good cash flow solution for Chrysler?
Sadly, I think that the enthusiasts are way too loud.
Well, but
I don't know.
How much of this do you guys think is actually substantive versus we wanted a headline? Because a couple of years ago, they announced a whole brand for EVs, and Fiat came in and killed it. And almost until I hear it from Fiat, I don't trust anything that Chrysler says in terms of long term.
They have the gem. Okay, Chelsea. They have the gem. Excuse me.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. Not anymore.
And actually, I don't have an issue with SRT fundamentally being opposed to EVs because, as we've discussed, EVs can be very high performance, and you could integrate some of the technology into something like the SRT brand and have it be very, very high performance. I think we'll ultimately see EVs dominating SEMA, or at least a good chunk of it, and some interest in that higher performance and modification, all of those sorts of things. So I don't think they're at odds philosophically necessarily, but I just wonder how real it all is anyway, and how much of a business there is.
That's the question. That's the question that's got to be asked. I don't look at SRT in terms of what you can get SRT today as long-term solution. This is just my opinion. I believe Chrysler is doing this because they know they've got to keep themselves in the news. They've got to keep people aware of that Chrysler still exists. Yes, SRT is primarily at enthusiasts, but it's a limited market. It's not $200,000 a year.
Right.
Why wouldn't they call it Mopar?
Why would what now?
Why wouldn't they call it Mopar?
Mopar is more the part.
The general public doesn't really know what Mopar is, but everyone knows what SRT is.
Yes, right now they do. Now, if you ask somebody who's around 60s, they know what Mopar is.
Right.
Anybody younger, anybody relatively young, no, they don't.
You want to talk about an enthusiast line?
Yeah.
Mopar, man.
Yeah, SRT is appropriate for right now. But the question is long term, because if anybody watched that little interview that Bloomberg did with Marchioni that was just recently, he's trying to figure out how to pull out more money from Chrysler with the IPO.
Oh, if you have the link, put it in the chat room.
What? Yeah, because it should be with Bloomberg. I didn't get to put the link in or anything like that. But what he said was he's got to figure out with I think the Romania is basically the Canadian government and the VIBA. How is he going to pull out a few billion more dollars?
All right, but here's the thing.
Go ahead.
High performance lines and brands, if you want to call them that in some cases, they're not the money makers. All they do
right,
is
like
build
the
brand
M
credibility.
class, like
BMW M is not a moneymaker.
AMG,
what do they really do though? What do they really do?
They develop technology and they improve vehicle dynamics. So it's valuable to brand equity and recognition and credibility as a manufacturer of high performance vehicles. So people, just to take BMW for example, even in vehicles that are not M vehicles, that are not an M3 or an M5, you can still get, a 5 Series M Sport, or you can get, M components. It's a whole, there's actually, they built a whole lifestyle type thing around the M brand. So it's not, it doesn't make money directly, but it helps them get more brand recognition. So I think
go ahead.
But to that end, I don't know if, I don't know. I mean, I think you're right that SRT is much more relevant now than Mopar is in the general public. So, I mean, just if you're just talking about young kids who are, the SRT4 is, I see a lot of those running around here.
You talking about like the old neon SRT4?
Yeah, I see a lot of people who have those, or if they don't have an actual SRT4, they've worked their car to try to make it look like an SRT4.
Go ahead.
There is a lot of relevance, I think, with the SRT line. Now, I don't know how much significance there is, as somebody mentioned earlier, about the actual reality of it becoming its own brand versus just a subset of Chrysler in the way that AMG or the M division is. It actually becoming its own brand. I don't know what that's going to mean or how that's actually going to be structured. But I think if they play it right, it can be very valuable to Chrysler. Now, the other thing is, I think a major reason why some of these high-performance divisions of these companies like AMG and the M division or Ford Racing or any of those are respected and well-known and provide positive brand equity to the companies that back them is because they've all got strong they've got a lot in racing series. So they've got the track credibility and the pedigree to back them. That when BMW built the M3 way back when, it was built purely as to be able to stay in regulations to run that car in the racing series.
That's correct.
And that's why they have credibility. It's not because they just put out a car that drives really well and they slapped a cool badge on it. It's because they produced a car that's track-borne, just like, AMG is different because AMG was actually a tuner house that got bought by Mercedes.
That's right.
But even then, you're talking about credibility because it's a company that was proven and had a strong reputation that Mercedes incorporated into their brand. So you're talking about things that are already established and have strong credibility with the people who care about the performance stuff. SRT is there, but I don't know if it has the same weight that some of these other ones do.
To that point, I'm going to say this. Keep in mind, all those companies, you know what they did? They stuck with them, whether it's AMG, whether it's BMW M. They stuck with them. They kept them. Every time the Detroit 3 have something like this, they'll keep it for a while, and then you see it disappear. Like SVT used to be SVO. To me, in my opinion, I thought if they kept SVO, that could have been a very good halo for Ford. In the same vein that you're talking about the M and the AMG. SVO branded stuff. Like suspension packages, body kits, trim, things like that. Those things are sexy, and they do bring in money, which they do tend to be profitable.
Right.
They may not be profitable big money, but they'll bring customers in that will not look at you otherwise. You may not come out with an M3 or an M5, but you may come out with a 3 Series. You may come out with a 5 Series because of that brand that brings it's a halo effect. It brings glamour.
Yeah, that's very fair.
We talked about the racing, the racing series. But the only way SRT is going to work is they've got to be willing to stick with it. You can't just say we're going to bring it in today, and in 5 years from now, it disappears.
No, you're right. You're right.
Because that's what it has to do with. That's why I said the announcement's not bad in itself for right now. But over the years, if you don't stick with it, you lose credibility. So when you announce something else,
the whole thing of SRT, like SRT, it technically was its own division. It's its own separate part of. Or it's a division inside Chrysler. It was a special tuning house, if you will. That took cars and tweaked them to their specifications.
Along the lines of SHO, like that.
What they call PVO.
PVO, right? PVO was the actual the division that did. Like GM had the GM Performance division that was dismantled, and then Ford on again, off again, SVT, SVO.
SVT, yeah.
Right. So and again, like you were saying, but what I was saying, like having its own brand, being its own, how can that be? In my now that I think about it, because since Chrysler, all the Chrysler brands are all sold under one roof, and there's not like a Dodge dealer anymore. It's a multi-tiered house now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you're going to have an SRT dealership with a Ram dealership. Like I could almost understand the Ram breakoff and start its own thing, and so Dodge can differentiate itself from Ram, and Ram can be trucks and be more aggressive and get that kind of tough image that it wants, while Dodge can go to something a little bit different. But to have an SRT brand, I don't understand how that helps the other brands. How does that help? Like the M3 is a halo. M3, M5, M6 are the M series cars. Those are halos for the BMW brand. It's a sub brand.
They're not money makers. They're icons.
They're halos. They're the cars that I want an M3, but I can only afford a $35,000 328.
Hang on.
So why can't SRT?
How does
SRT?
Hang on. He just answered it a little while ago, and I backed him up. What you have to do is once you establish it, you've got to stick with that long term.
No, I have no problem with being it long term. My problem is why it being its own brand?
Mm-hmm.
How does that directly relate to being the rest of it Dodge?
Right.
Like an M3, the M technology can be trickled down through its brand. But
and to that end, people think that because they drive a BMW, they have visions, however accurate or not it is.
Right.
They have a perception that it is related to the M3 or the M5.
No. I 100% understand that.
So, and I'm agreeing with you that it's.
But for the SRT class, like if it's a whole brand, it's just like, oh well, they just took that Dodge there and they just made it better. But I don't know about that. It doesn't make me want to desire a Caliber.
I would say, Alex, that you're probably in a better position.
Hang on. Keep in mind, the M series is a brand in itself.
It's a separate company, but it's a division.
It is. But it's also a brand. AMG.
Yeah, but it's branded WM.
Yeah, no, there is not. But if SRT, if they do it the same way that Mercedes with AMG, BMW with M, Audi does with S to a lesser extent, or RS, same way. You have to stay consistent. You have to be persistent in that branding. It's
right, but branding and a brand are two different things. The badge on the hood is still what you're saying, then the badge on the hood is still going to be a Chrysler or a Dodge badge, but it's going to have an SRT badge on the trunk. Whereas what I'm talking about, like Alex, for example, being a GM guy, I don't readily, for example, the Pontiac Solstice and the Saturn Sky, they're the same car. But the average consumer didn't I know a number of people I'd say, it's the same thing. Really? They didn't think about it because it's not. They don't, even though they look identical when you put them next to each other, because they come out of two separate brands. They're in the consumer's mind, they're two different cars. So I don't think that an SRT brand is going to be directly valuable to Chrysler as a brand for building their entire lineup. Whereas if it is the SRT division and it still comes with the Chrysler or Dodge badge on the hood with the SRT badge on the trunk, that's a different story, and that's more in line with BMW and Mercedes.
That I agree. That I agree with.
I don't understand the purpose of making it its own brand. I understand the Ram brand to a certain extent, but there was still a lot of backlash for people, kind of, smirked at it and laughed at it that, okay, Ram's going to be its own brand. But now you're taking a very obscure part that is a small part. It is the most, I would say, the most religious, if you were to get in a car culture aspect of the brand. And you're going to break it off. Yeah, I mean, Mopar SRT8 is almost, I would say, in my world, is interchangeable. SRT8 is just a newer age of Mopar. Mopar is an aftermarket parts, or a OE aftermarket parts distributor, where SRT8 is an in-house tuning division. That's how, in my mind, I've always put it.
Right, but Mopar, I think that it is, as we were saying earlier, I think that SRT is a more recognizable badge and division to the general public.
Hey, hang on, you guys, just for a second. We're going to continue the chat, and it can continue, by the way. The line is open. It is open line, but I'm going to throw this over to my co-host, Chelsea, because she's going to do her first hourly before we sign out. And both of us may stay or not. We may just decide to let you guys have the night. But thank you for joining us. Chelsea.
My first hourly.
I know.
I got to. That sounds like a